Greetings, fellow fans. You're tuned into The Fiction World, presenting to you today, what if Deku was sent to RWBY and built breeding empire with Team RWBY and every beacon girl? Show some love by liking and subscribing. Enjoy the story ahead. Chapter 1, The Green Storm. The Grimm hit the convoy at dusk. There were 17 of them, beowulfs mostly, with 2 Ursa Major lumbering at the flanks like walking siege weapons. They came out of the tree line fast, the way Grimm always did when they smelled fear, and the bullhead transport carrying 12 beacon-bound students had plenty of that to offer. The pilot had already taken a claw through the windshield. The engine was screaming. The whole aircraft was tilting at an angle that made the horizon look like a bad dream, and Ruby Rose was standing at the open cargo door firing crescent rows into the dark because standing still had never once been an option for her. "Yang, left side," she shouted over the wind. "I see it." The Ursa hit the bullhead's left thruster and the whole aircraft dropped 20 feet in a single lurching second. Students slammed into the walls. Someone was crying. Blake caught the ceiling rail with one hand and Weiss with the other, both of them hanging while the transport groaned around them. "We're going down," the co-pilot screamed from the front. Ruby did the math in her head. 30 meters off the ground. 14 students who couldn't survive that drop without a soft landing. For members of Team RWBY who might, if they were lucky, walk away from it. She was already calculating which angle of Crescent Rose's blade she could use to slow the descent when the night outside the cargo door turned green. Not the pale sickly green of a dying dust flare. Something brighter. Something that hit the tree line and carved through it like the trees were made of paper, and the sound that followed wasn't an explosion, it was a crack, the kind of sound that made the air itself flinch. 2 of the beowulfs simply stopped existing. The Ursa on the left flank took the edge of whatever that was and went spinning into the forest canopy like a ragdoll. The bullhead lurched again, stabilizing slightly as the weight on its left side vanished. Ruby was gripping the door frame so hard her knuckles had gone white. She stared out into the tree line. The remaining Grimm were hesitating, which was something she had never seen Grimm do. They were pooling at the edge of the clearing, hackles raised, the red light in their masks flickering like something had rattled them at a frequency she couldn't hear. Then something landed in the clearing. He dropped from somewhere high, she couldn't tell where, the dark had swallowed the origin, and when he hit the ground he hit it hard, both feet, a crater of churned earth exploding outward in a ring, and he straightened up slowly, like the impact hadn't registered at all. He was wearing a dark bodysuit with red accents that had seen better days, the fabric torn in places and scorched in others, and his hair was a wreck of dark green curls that the wind immediately made worse. He looked young. That was the first thing Ruby thought, because she was always better at noticing things than people gave her credit for. He looked her age, maybe a year or 2 older, with a face that should have been unremarkable except for the fact that it was currently reading complete, calm, unhurried focus. He looked at the Grimm the way a butcher looks at a rack of meat. His arm came up. His hand was wrapped in something, old scars, she realized, the kind that took years to accumulate, a layered map of damage that traveled from his knuckles to his elbow, and the air around that arm began to move wrong. It pulled inward and then out, like a single breath, and the green lightning that followed was nothing like any semblance she had ever seen. It didn't crackle or pulse the way aura-derived power did. It moved with intention, climbing his arm in a double helix pattern that lit the clearing in pulses of electric emerald. The nearest Beowulf charged. He didn't step back. He didn't raise his guard or lower his center of gravity into a defensive stance. He simply threw a punch. The Beowulf disintegrated. Not from the impact. Before the impact. The shockwave of air that preceded his fist hit it like a wall of compressed force and the Beowulf's bones gave up, and then the Grimm dissolved the way they always did, black smoke and red light and then nothing, and the tree line 30 meters behind where it had been standing now had a hole through it wide enough to drive a cargo truck through. The remaining Grimm broke. Ruby had fought Grimm for 4 years. She had never, not once, seen them run. What, Yang said from directly behind her, voice stripped of everything except flat astonishment, was that the bullhead was still descending. The pilot managed something approximating a controlled crash, more controlled than Ruby had any right to expect, and they hit the clearing in a grinding slide that threw everyone sideways, overhead panels cracking, emergency lights strobing amber. Ruby was on her feet before the slide finished, Crescent Rose already transforming, and she was out the emergency hatch in under 3 seconds with Yang right behind her and Blake a half step after that. Weiss came last, because Weiss always had to make sure her dust vials were secured before leaping into anything, which was a quality Ruby had learned to appreciate even when it was irritating. The young man was standing about 20 meters from the wreck, facing the tree line, one arm still trailing the last threads of green light. He wasn't moving. His breathing was slow and measured. He was listening. Ruby walked toward him because she was Team RWBY's leader and that was what leaders did. Also because she was genuinely incapable of not walking toward interesting things, a fact her Uncle Crow had described as both her greatest strength and the most likely cause of her eventual death. "Hey," she called out. He turned around. Up close, the scars were even more pronounced, not just his arms but a lattice across his jaw, the bridge of his nose, one fading line that cut from below his left eye toward his chin. His eyes were green, a shade that was almost uncanny in the fading light, and they moved over her with quick, professional assessment before landing on her face and simply staying there. "Are the people in the transport okay?" he asked. His accent was wrong, not Vale, not Atlas, not anything she could place. The words were right but the music behind them was from somewhere else entirely. There, Ruby glanced back. Students were emerging from the hatch, some limping, some just pale and shaking but upright. "Yeah. I think so. Did you just punch a Grimm into nothing?" "2 of them." He looked back at the tree line. "There's a third Ursa about 400 meters northeast. It stopped when the others ran. It'll move again in about 3 minutes once the instinct overrides the fear response." Ruby stared at him. "How do you know that?" "I've fought a lot of things that run away and then come back." He said it without drama, like a man recounting weather. "I'll go deal with it." "You don't have to, someone should." He was already walking. Yang appeared at Ruby's shoulder, watching him go. "Okay," she said. "I'm into it." "Yang." "What?" "Look at his arms. Look at the crater he made. When's the last time you saw someone make a crater with their feet? He might be dangerous. He just saved our bullhead from a pack of Grimm without breaking a sweat. Also," Yang tilted her head, the smile starting at the corner of her mouth, definitely not complaining about the view. "He's a stranger. The most interesting kind." Blake had moved to the edge of the clearing, golden eyes tracking the young man's path into the dark. Her ears, hidden under her bow, as always, would have been forward. Ruby knew that posture. Blake was listening for something in how he moved, some tell that the rest of them might miss. "He's not from Remnant," Blake said quietly. Ruby frowned. "How can you tell?" "The way he assessed the situation when he landed. He looked at everything, the transport, us, the Grimm, the tree line, but he looked at the Grimm last. Someone raised here looks at the Grimm first. It's instinct." She paused. He wasn't afraid of them. Not even a little. Most people are afraid of Grimm even when they're trained to fight them. You can see it in the eyes, just for a second. He didn't have it. 40 meters into the dark there was a sound like a thunderclap with something wet inside it, and then silence. He came back 2 minutes later, not 3, brushing bark off his shoulder. "Dealt with," he said. Weiss had been standing slightly behind the group, arms crossed, expression doing the careful analytical thing she did when she was processing rather than reacting. She spoke before Ruby could. "Your combat style. I've catalogued every major huntsman technique used in the 4 kingdoms and I don't recognize what you just did. What semblance generates that kind of kinetic output?" He looked at her. Then at Ruby. Then at Blake and Yang in turn, reading the group the way he'd read the clearing. "That's a long conversation," he said. "Probably better had somewhere that isn't a crash site in the middle of Grimm territory." He wasn't wrong about that. The Vale Rangers arrived 40 minutes later with 2 functional bullheads and a medical team. The students were processed efficiently, 3 minor injuries, 1 broken wrist from the initial crash, nothing that a dose of aura stabilization and a night of rest wouldn't handle. Ruby handled the debrief with the lead ranger officer while Yang kept an eye on their green-haired stranger, who sat on a piece of wreckage at the edge of the clearing and said nothing. He hadn't given them a name. Ruby had asked, gently, and he tilted his head like the question had caught him off guard, not suspiciously, but genuinely, like he'd temporarily lost track of why it mattered. "Midoriya," he'd said finally. "Izuku Midoriya." Ruby rose, she'd said back, and extended her hand. He'd looked at it for a moment, then shaken it. His grip was careful in the specific way of someone who has had to learn to be careful because their default setting broke things. Now, as the second bullhead loaded up, the lead ranger officer walked over to where Izuku was sitting. "You the one who cleared the Grimm?" he asked, stylus hovering over his scroll's report screen. "Yes. Huntsman certification." Izuku's pause this time was only a beat. "I'm not from around here." The ranger officer looked at him over the top of his scroll. "I can see that. You got ID?" "No." "Registered semblance?" "Not here." The ranger officer's stylus stopped moving. He looked at Ruby with the expression of a man who wanted someone else to solve his problem. Ruby looked at the sky. Yang made a show of studying her nails. Weiss stepped forward. "He's a transfer student," Weiss said, with the crisp confident tone of someone who had spent their entire childhood learning how to say false things in a way that made bureaucrats too intimidated to question them. "Documentation is pending. He was assigned to our transport." "Surely the priority here is the students who were injured, officer." The ranger officer's name tag said Hendricks. Hendricks looked at his scroll, at Weiss, at the crater in the clearing, and at the new hole in the tree line through which you could see moonlight. "Right," Hendricks said. "Transfer student. Pending documentation." He made a note. "Try to keep the property damage to a minimum next time, son." "I'll try," Izuku said, with complete sincerity. The flight back to Vale took 25 minutes. Ruby sat across from Izuku in the back of the bullhead while the other students dozed or stared out the windows, and her team arranged themselves with the specific intentional casualness of 4 people pretending not to be paying close attention. "Where are you actually from?" Ruby asked, keeping her voice under the engine noise. Izuku watched the lights of Vale growing in the viewport. "A place that isn't here," he said. Then, after a moment, like he was testing the words, "a different world." "I know how that sounds. Remnant has some weird dust phenomena," Ruby said, surprising herself with her own lack of skepticism. "Dimensional stuff. There are records of it in the scrolls. Mostly theoretical, but," she shrugged, "you dropped out of the sky during a Grimm attack, so I'm willing to be flexible." Something in his expression shifted. It wasn't quite gratitude, but it was adjacent to it. Like he'd braced for disbelief and found the absence of it disorienting. "There was a fight," he said quietly. "The final one. There was a collapse, of space, of something, I couldn't," he stopped. "Started again. I was in a city in my world. And then I was above your forest. Falling. Were you hurt?" He held up one of his arms. The scars were silver in the bullhead's cabin light. "These are old. From before." He flexed his fingers, then released. "I'm fine." Ruby watched him. He said "I'm fine" the way people did when they'd said it so many times it had become a reflex rather than a claim. "Okay," she said. "What do you do in your world? Who are you, when you're there?" He was quiet for a long moment. "A hero," he said. And the word came out carrying about 50 years of meaning in 4 letters. Ruby understood that, she thought. Not the weight of it, she was 16 and the heaviest thing she'd carried yet was the memory of her mother's grave, but the structure. The shape of a person who had been aimed at something since before they were old enough to choose it. We have those here too, she said. We call them huntsmen. Hunters of Grimm. She paused. You'd make a pretty good one. The corner of his mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile but it was in the same family. I got that impression, he said. Beacon Academy at night was something that never quite got old, even for students who'd been there a year already. The towers caught the moonlight and threw it back with interest, the whole cliff-top campus glowing soft amber and white, and the city of Vale spread below it like a scattered handful of lights. Ruby had made this approach 100 times and it still hit somewhere in her chest, that particular feeling she could never quite name, part pride, part purpose, part something she suspected was love, the kind you had for a place rather than a person. Tonight it hit differently, because she was watching Izuku Midoriya see it for the first time. He didn't say anything. He was standing at the viewport in a way that suggested the view had surprised him into stillness, and his expression was doing something complicated that she didn't want to stare at directly because it felt private. She looked away, out her own window, and let him have the moment. The bullhead docked. Students filed out. Glinda Goodwitch was waiting on the landing pad with the particular expression she reserved for situations that required addressing at 11 o'clock at night when she should have been doing anything else. Glinda was tall, precise, and had hair that never moved in the wind, which Ruby had always privately found impressive. She taught combat class with a riding crop and an expression that made you feel like you'd already disappointed her before you'd done anything. She was brilliant. Ruby respected her enormously and also found her mildly terrifying. Glinda ran her eyes over the students as they disembarked, counting and cataloging. When she reached Izuku she paused. Mr., she said. Midoriya, he said. Izuku Midoriya. You're not in my manifest, Mr. Midoriya. No. You're going to need to explain that. I know. They looked at each other. Glinda had a gaze that most people wilted under. Izuku's gaze was something else, not defiant, not particularly aggressive, just steady in a way that suggested he had stood in front of much worse things than a stern teacher and found himself unmoved. Glinda blinked first. It was barely perceptible and she recovered immediately, but Ruby saw it. Come with me, Glinda said. She turned and walked. Izuku followed. Glinda glanced back once, at Ruby, and her expression said this conversation is not over, and then the double doors of the landing deck closed behind them. Yang materialized beside Ruby. She clocked him, Yang said admiringly. And then blinked. Glinda Goodwitch blinked. I'm aware. Okay, but that's either the best sign or the worst sign. I can't tell which. Me neither. Yang threw an arm around her shoulder. So we sleep, obviously, and then find out which in the morning. Obviously, Ruby agreed, and let herself be steered toward the dormitory, crescent rose folded over her back and her head full of green lightning in craters and a voice that said a hero like it cost something to say it. Ojban's office was at the top of Beacon Tower and the elevator ride-up took long enough that most people arrived either anxious or resigned, which was likely intentional. Izuku arrived the way he'd arrived at most things tonight, observant and unhurried. The office was circular, which he noted. Gears in the walls, all turning at different rhythms in a mechanical patience that spoke of someone who had learned to think in very long units of time. The desk was a single slab of polished dark wood. Behind it, Professor Ojban, silver-haired, measured, with eyes that had the particular quality of a man who had been asking questions longer than most people had been alive, was drinking cocoa. Glinda had briefed him on the walk up, sharp and efficient, the relevant facts, unregistered individual, unknown origin, cleared a Grimm attack on a student transport using power that did not match any catalogued semblance expression. Property damage, extensive. Casualties, 0. Ojban set down his mug. He looked at Izuku across the broad desk the way a chess player looks at an unexpected piece. Sit, he said. Izuku sat. You're not from Remnant, Ojban said. Not a question. No. Where, then? Izuku considered the question, the way a person does when they're deciding how much truth a situation can bear. A different world, he said. Same sentence, same sky, different history. Mine had no Grimm. He paused. It had other things. Ojban folded his hands on the desk. The power you use tonight, not a semblance. I gathered. I have a working familiarity with every documented semblance expression in the Four Kingdoms and several dozen undocumented ones besides. What you demonstrated tonight is something else. Will you explain it? It's called One for All, Izuku said, and for the second time that night he said something like it was a weight he'd picked back up. It's a quirk, in my world, the word we use for what you call a semblance. But it's more than that. It was passed down to me, through people who gave everything they had to make it what it is. It multiplies force. Physical force, speed, output. It also, he flexed his fingers, does some other things, now, after long enough. I'm still learning where the ceiling is. Is there one? Izuku looked at him steadily. I'm not sure yet. Ojban picked up his mug again. The gears in the walls turned. What do you want, Mr. Midoriya? Another honest question, delivered with minimal decoration. Izuku appreciated that. I don't know yet, he said, which was the most honest answer he'd given all night. I landed here by accident. I don't know how to go back or whether going back is even an option. I have skills that are useful. He glanced out the window at the city below. This world has things that need fighting. I know how to fight them. That seems like a reasonable place to start. Ojban was quiet for a moment. Then, you could pass any admission assessment we administer. That would be obvious to anyone who watched you tonight. You could also walk into Vale tomorrow morning and operate independently without my permission and there would be very little we could do to prevent it. He said this factually, without resentment. So why are you sitting in my office? Because working alone when you don't have to is poor strategy, Izuku said. And because your students were in danger tonight, and they handled themselves well, considering. He thought of the girl with the scythe, firing into the dark without hesitating. They deserve proper backup. Something moved at the corner of Ojban's mouth. It wasn't quite a smile but it was in the same family as something warmer than his baseline. Glinda, he said. He'll need a dormitory assignment, Glinda said from behind Izuku, her voice carrying the resigned tone of someone who had already started solving the logistics problem. Put him in the East Wing. The room adjacent to Team RWBY. Ojban looked at Izuku. They'll be your most immediate allies. I suspect they already are. He paused. Welcome to Beacon, Mr. Midoriya. Unofficially, for the moment. We'll formalize the paperwork tomorrow. The ranger officer already has a report listing me as a transfer student with pending documentation, Izuku said. Glinda made a small sharp sound that was either disapproval or suppressed amusement. Possibly both. How convenient, Ojban said, and finally let himself smile. The East Wing dormitory hallway was quiet at midnight, warm amber light in the sconces, the distant sound of the city below carried on a breeze through a cracked window somewhere. Glinda walked Izuku to a door, produced a key card from her sleeve with the practiced efficiency of someone who always had exactly what was needed, and held it out. Uniform requisition is at 7, she said. Assessment is at 9. Don't be late. I won't. She studied him for a moment with those sharp green eyes. The riding crop was in her hand, not raised, just present. You said the people in the transport handled themselves well. They did. They did significantly better than the situation should have allowed, Glinda said, and there was something in her voice that was very close to pride, though she kept it carefully measured. They're my students. I expect they'll want answers from you tomorrow that your conversation on the bullhead didn't provide. Probably. You should give them honest ones. She turned to leave, then stopped. Not because they'll demand it. Because they'll have earned it. She walked away down the hallway, heels precise on the stone floor, and didn't look back. Izuku stood there for a moment in the quiet corridor, the key card in his hand. Through the wall to his left he could hear, faintly, the settling sounds of 4 people in the room next door. A voice that was probably Ruby's, low and still animated even at midnight, then a deeper laugh, young, then quiet. He pressed his palm flat against the door to his room. The wood was real and solid and cold in a way that felt undeniable. He was here. Whatever here turned out to mean, he was in it. He opened the door, stepped through, and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, and for the first time since he'd fallen through whatever had torn itself open above a ruined city in a world that was no longer there to go back to, he let himself breathe. Really breathe. The kind where you let your shoulders come down from around your ears and your lungs actually fill and you accept, just for a moment, that you're alive in a place that doesn't need you to be anything other than what you already are. His phone was dead, had been dead since the crossing, the screen cracked across one corner by something that had happened during the fall. He'd held on to it anyway, because there were photos on it, and the human things you held on to weren't always the practical ones. He set it on the small table beside the bed. Through the wall, Yang's laugh again, shorter this time, trailing into sleep. Outside the window, Vale glittered. Somewhere out there in those streets were people who were afraid of Grimm that came out of the dark when fear got loud enough. Somewhere out in the forests were Grimm that had run from him tonight, which meant they would come back smarter and angrier. He lay back on the bed, still in his battered suit, and looked at the ceiling. Tomorrow, a uniform. An assessment. Answers he owed to people who had earned them. Tonight, just this. His eyes closed. He didn't dream, or if he did, he didn't remember. What he had instead was something that felt, for the first time in a very long time, close to rest. In the room next door, Ruby Rose was lying on her bunk staring at the ceiling and thinking about craters and green lightning and the way a person could say I'm fine and mean about 17 different things by it. Yang was already asleep below her, which Yang could do literally anywhere. It was one of her most impressive and infuriating qualities. Blake was in the corner with a book, which was normal. Weiss was doing what Weiss did when she was processing something, lying still with her eyes open, cataloging. He's going to be in the assessment tomorrow, Ruby said. Obviously, Weiss said. Are you going to ask him about the semblance again? It's not a semblance. That's exactly what I'm going to ask him about. Blake turned a page without looking up. He'll tell us when he's ready. Blake, he punched a Grimm out of existence, Weiss said. And he saved the transport, Blake said. Those 2 facts are equally relevant. Ruby pulled her blanket up. He said he was a hero, she said, mostly to herself. In his world. He is a hero, Blake said quietly. You can see it in how he moves. He walks like someone who spent a very long time walking toward things that scared him. She paused. He just doesn't look scared anymore. Silence settled. The city hummed below. I like him, Ruby decided. You like everyone, Weiss said. I liked you, Ruby said. Turned out fine. A beat. Then, from Weiss, reasonably fine. Go to sleep. Ruby smiled at the ceiling and closed her eyes, and outside, Vale turned slowly below Beacon's towers, and the green lightning was gone from the tree line, and the night was very, very quiet. Chapter 2, The Weight of Aura. The assessment was scheduled for 9. Izuku was on the training grounds at 6. Not because he was nervous, nerves implied uncertainty about the outcome, and he'd stopped being uncertain about outcomes in training scenarios somewhere around the 4th time One for All had pushed past a new ceiling and he'd had to spend 3 weeks rebuilding his own body around the new normal. He was there because he didn't know what else to do with himself at 6 in the morning in a world that wasn't his, and movement had always been better than stillness when his head got loud. The training grounds were empty at that hour except for the grounds maintenance crew, a pair of older men who glanced at him once, decided he wasn't their problem, and went back to their work. The facility was good, better than good, actually. Reinforced combat arenas with dust-hardened walls, weighted training dummies built to withstand semblance-level impacts, a full obstacle course that someone had clearly designed with both creativity and malice. The morning air was clean and cold off the cliffs, the city still half asleep below. Izuku warmed up the way he always did, which to outside eyes would have looked like a man casually destroying a training dummy with a series of measured strikes that left visible compression craters in the dust-hardened material. He worked through the full sequence, fingers, arms, shoulders, core, and then let one for all come up to maybe 30%, not because he was trying to hide it but because a full output test on these dummies would have turned them into debris and he didn't feel like explaining that before breakfast. He was working through footwork patterns when he heard the door to the training complex open behind him. "You're up early," Yang said, dropping her gym bag next to the wall and pulling her hair back with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been doing it since before she was fully awake. She was in training clothes, cropped top, shorts, the mechanical arm gleaming in the early light. She looked at the craters in the dummy. "So are your fists, apparently." "Old habit," he said. "What time do you usually start?" "Depends on the day." 4, sometimes. 5 if I'm being lazy. Yang stared at him. "You're being serious." "Training was," he started, and then reconsidered the sentence. "Where I'm from, the gap between prepared and unprepared had real consequences. I got used to not being on the wrong side of it." She seemed to be running an internal calculation, the kind where you reassess someone based on new information. Then she grabbed her own pair of weighted gloves from the bag, pulled them on with the casual snap of someone who knew exactly what she was about, and walked over to the adjacent training dummy. They trained in parallel for about 20 minutes without speaking, which turned out to be comfortable rather than awkward. Yang trained hard, genuinely hard, the kind that built rather than maintained, not the performance effort Izuku had seen from people who worked out with an audience in mind. She had a technical base that was strong, her movement efficient and powerful, and the mechanical arms integration with her fighting style was seamless in a way that spoke to a lot of hours rebuilding that particular muscle memory. He noticed she favored her right side in certain guard positions. Not from weakness, from old habit predating the prosthetic. He filed it away without comment. "Can I ask you something?" Yang said, between sets. "Yes." "Last night, when you punched the Beowulf," she stopped, seeming to look for the right frame, "what did that feel like? To you?" He considered the question seriously, because it deserved that. "Like breathing," he said. Yang absorbed this. "Must be nice," she said, and went back to her dummy, and her voice had been perfectly even but something in it was not, and he recognized the particular flavor of that something. It was the way people sounded when they were good at something and had just glimpsed someone for whom the same thing was effortless. Not jealousy, exactly. More like a recalibration of sky. "Your rotation on the right cross is generating about 15% less torque than it could," he said. "Because of the guard position you default into before it. If you shifted your left shoulder forward 2 centimeters before the combination starts," "I didn't ask for a critique," she said. "I know." He paused. "You're still going to want to try the adjustment." A beat. Then she shifted her left shoulder forward 2 centimeters and threw the right cross and the dummy moved back a full inch on its post and she stopped and looked at her hands and then at him. "That's annoying," she said. "You're very good," he said, simply and directly, because it was true and he saw no reason to bury it in qualification. "What you do with your semblance and your natural strength combined is exceptional. I'm just talking about geometry." Yang looked at him for a moment, really looked, the way she'd been doing since last night but with less of the performance attached to it now. "You do that with everyone? The reading and the optimizing?" "I pay attention to people," he said. "It's useful." She picked up her water bottle and threw him one from her bag without asking. He caught it. "Ruby likes you," she said, the non sequitur landing with the deliberate weight of something that wasn't actually a non sequitur. She told me before she fell asleep. She's a pretty good judge of character, my sister. Got it from our mom, probably. He said nothing, waiting. She gets attached fast, Yang continued, and now the tone had shifted, carrying a very older sibling frequency. She trusts too easily, she always has, and it's one of the things I love most about her and also the thing that keeps me up at night. I understand, Izuku said. Do you? I have friends who trusted me, he said. I know what that means. What it costs when you're wrong and what it builds when you're not. Yang studied him over the rim of her water bottle. Then, okay, she said, like she'd made a decision. Fair enough. She grabbed her bag. Assessments in 2 hours. You might want to eat something. Probably, he agreed. Cafeteria opens at 7. Blake will already be there. She gets there before it opens and reads in the queue, it's a whole thing. Yang moved toward the exit, then paused with her hand on the door. For what it's worth, the thing with the Beowulf. The way it looked when you hit it. She grinned, and it was the full version, the one that had no calculation in it. Best thing I've seen all year. She left. The door swung closed. The training grounds were quiet again except for the sound of a city waking up below the cliffs. Izuku looked at the craters in the dummy for a moment, then finished his water and went to find breakfast. He found Blake in the cafeteria queue at exactly 7:02, reading a worn paperback with the focused disengagement of someone who had perfected the art of being technically present while actually somewhere else entirely. She looked up when he sat down across from her, and her gold eyes did a quick, assessing sweep before she went back to her book. Yang told you I'd be here, she said. She mentioned it. A cafeteria worker began unlocking the serving stations. Blake closed the paperback with a bookmark. No dog ears, he noted, the unconscious care of someone who respected the object, and folded her hands on the table. You picked up on something last night, she said. About me. On the bullhead. It wasn't a question and it wasn't an accusation. It was a test, or something close to one. I noticed, he said carefully, that the bow you're wearing doesn't sit the way a fabric accessory sits. The silence was the specific kind that meant he'd gotten something exactly right and she was deciding how to handle that. And, she said. And nothing, he said. Where I'm from, people were defined by what they could do and who they chose to be, not by what kind of ability they were born with. I don't have opinions about the rest. Blake looked at him for a long moment. The cafeteria was filling up around them, noise building, trays clattering. That's a very idealistic position, she said. Given that it's not how most of the world works. I know, he said. Doesn't mean it's wrong. Blake was quiet again. Then she stood, picked up her book and her tray, and said, I'll tell you which stations have the better food. The eggs on the right are consistently worse. Good to know, he said, and followed her through the line. The assessment hall was a long room with gallery seating above a full combat arena, the floor reinforced, the walls embedded with observation equipment that tracked speed, force output, aura levels, and a dozen other metrics Izuku didn't have the terminology for yet. Most of the first and second year students had been assembled for what was officially described as a standard assessment session, which was obviously a polite fiction. The gallery was at unusual capacity, and every faculty member who didn't have a class at 9 in the morning seemed to have found a reason to be present. Glinda ran the session from the arena floor with the writing crop and the expression. She worked through 6 standard assessments in the first 40 minutes, speed trials, aura output measurement, dust proficiency, combat sequencing. The students she was running were good, genuinely talented, and Izuku watched from the gallery with the focused patience of someone who had been observing and cataloging since childhood. He cataloged. A girl with a hammer nearly the size of herself who moved with reckless, devastating momentum, Nora, someone said nearby. Beside her, a boy with a quiet efficiency of movement and a semblance that seemed to calm and read the environment, who fought with a grace that was more like water than muscle, Ren. A red-haired girl in the next group who moved through the combat sequence with a technical perfection that was actually slightly breathtaking, every strike landing at exactly the right angle, every guard positioned with mathematical precision. He recognized the particular quality of it. He'd seen it in people who'd spent so much time being the best in the room that perfection had become their normal. Weiss was in his row in the gallery. She had been making notes in a leather-bound scroll since she sat down, and he was fairly sure at least some of those notes were about him. "The red-haired girl," he said quietly. "What's her name?" Weiss didn't look up from her scroll. "Nikos. She's exceptional. She is the best first-year combatant at this academy," Weiss said, with the clipped tone of someone delivering an undisputed fact. "Four-time Mistral regional champion. Undefeated." He watched Pyrrha move through the final sequence of the assessment, a three-opponent simultaneous drill that she handled by engineering all three opponents into a single line through environmental manipulation, and then resolved with 2 strikes. "Clean, intelligent, absolute. She fights like she's done it so many times it stopped surprising her," he said, mostly to himself. Weiss's pen slowed. "What does that mean?" "It means she hasn't been challenged in a while." He watched Pyrrha receive her scores, her expression receiving the perfect marks with a politeness that was just slightly too composed to be genuine pleasure. Someone who's still finding edges to their ability shows them when they push. She's not pushing. She's performing. Weiss set down her pen and looked at him properly for the first time since they'd sat down. "For someone who's been here less than 12 hours, you have a great deal of opinions. They're observations. You can have them for free." Weiss caught herself. Then, with the particular dignity of someone recalibrating, "Your assessment is next." He knew. He'd known from the moment he'd walked in and seen the room full, and Glinda's expression carrying an additional layer of "today will be interesting" beneath the standard competence. "Midoriya." Glinda's voice from the arena floor, even across the distance. Carrying a teacher's natural authority without effort. He stood, moved down from the gallery, and stepped onto the arena floor. It felt like standing in a practice gym. The scale was right, the materials were right, the lighting was adequate. He'd trained in worse. He'd trained in rubble, in flooding basements, on rooftops during lightning storms, alongside people who thought training at 70% was preparation for enemies who operated at 100. This was fine. Glinda regarded him across the arena floor with professional assessment. "Standard sequence," she said. "Speed trial first. You'll run the course," she indicated the obstacle arrangement being deployed at the far end, "and we'll establish a baseline." "All right," he said. "Is there anything about the equipment I should know about before we begin?" "The dummies probably won't survive a full output test," he said. "I was conservative earlier in training. If you want real numbers, you'll need more durable targets." The gallery was very quiet. "We'll start at the level you're comfortable with," Glinda said. "And adjust from there." He nodded. The speed trial went first. The course was designed around what was clearly considered an elite first-year pace, obstacles at intervals that assumed fast but not superhuman movement. He ran it at roughly 20%, not out of any desire to sandbagging, but because running it faster at this stage would have destroyed sections of the course and made the subsequent sections unmeasurable. He cleared it clean, every obstacle handled without pause, and at 20% the metric system started making a sound like a man doing math in his head who wasn't getting an answer he recognized. He stopped at the end of the course and turned around. The room was quiet enough that he could hear the obstacle timer still processing. "Again," Glinda said. "At whatever you actually run at." He looked at her. She looked back. He ran it again. He didn't go to 100. He went to 60, because 60 was illustrative without being gratuitous, and at 60 he was moving at a speed that the tracking equipment registered by screaming, not literally, but close, the readout numbers climbing past the apparent ceiling of the scale before the software recalibrated. He cleared the course in under 2 seconds. He didn't stop at the end because 60% carried momentum. He managed with a half turn and he ended up walking the last 3 steps back toward the floor marker. The room was very quiet again, but a different kind of quiet. The kind that came after something recalibrated everyone's frame of reference simultaneously. Nikos, in the gallery, had leaned forward in her seat. He noticed this because he noticed things. Force output, Glinda said, and her voice was steady, which he respected. She directed him toward a reinforced measurement panel set into the far wall, a flat surface of dust-compressed alloy embedded with force gauges, designed to take semblance-level impact. "What does a top score look like?" he asked. "The record is held by a third-year Atlas student who registered 412 kilograms of force," Glinda said. "It's considered significantly above the expected range for a student of his level." "Okay," he said. He walked up to the panel. He pulled one for all to maybe 15%, the minimum he needed to give a reading that wasn't embarrassingly below what the speed trial had already suggested, and hit the panel with a straight right hand. The force gauge registered. The number climbed. The gauge reached its ceiling and kept going, and the ceiling was 1,000 kilograms, and the number pushed past it, and the embedded software did the same recalibrating process as before, and the wall behind the force panel developed a visible crack that ran from the gauge point to the upper left corner. Silence. "I cracked your wall," Izuku said. "I'll pay for it." "We have insurance," Glinda said, in a voice that was absolutely controlled and had a very slight tremor in it that was not, he thought, fear. It was wonder, maybe. Or the particular sound of a person's entire reference system being rearranged. He turned to face the gallery. Most of the students were looking at the wall. Or at their scrolls, where the readout numbers were presumably doing something alarming. Ruby was grinning with her whole face, the uncomplicated grin of someone watching something they'd already believed get confirmed. Yang had an expression that was equal parts impressed, and I knew it. Weiss was looking at her notes with an expression that said she was crossing out earlier conclusions and rewriting them. Blake was still and watchful. Nikos was looking directly at him with an expression he recognized because he had worn it himself, a long time ago, standing in front of someone who had what he'd been reaching toward without knowing what it was. Not envy. Recognition. "The aura assessment," Glinda said. He turned back to the floor. "I should tell you up front that I don't have aura," he said. "Not in the way you'd measure it. What I have is different. If the test is measuring aura signatures, it's going to return a null reading, and that's accurate." Glinda processed this. "The aura activation test won't work," he said. "I don't need an aura unlocked. The energy source is internal, but it's not the same thing." He paused, looking for a way to make it make sense. "Think of it like, your aura is a battery that comes with the hardware of your body. Mine is a power source I was given, that's been developed, that gets bigger the more it's used. It doesn't behave the same way. Can it be depleted? Yes. But the depletion threshold is, he considered, significantly higher than anything I'd encounter in a training scenario." Glinda made a note. "Combat assessment," she said. "I had 3 advanced students prepared to run the simultaneous drill. Is there something more challenging?" he said, not arrogantly, genuinely asking, because 3 opponents in a simultaneous drill was what Pyrrha had just done, and if it was the ceiling of what the assessment offered, he'd need to be careful about output levels to avoid making the assessment meaningless. Glinda looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked up at the gallery. "Pyrrha," she said. "Would you be willing?" Pyrrha was on her feet before the question finished, and there was something in how quickly she moved that answered a question about whether she'd been waiting for it. Nikos had never lost. She knew how that sounded, and she'd long since stopped trying to frame it differently. It was simply true, the way the color of her hair was simply true, and over time the fact of it had become its own cage, because every opponent she faced now knew it too, and knowing it changed them before the fight started. Made them tighter, or reckless, or overly strategic. They fought the reputation rather than her, and that meant she'd stopped being actually challenged years ago. Standing on the arena floor across from Izuku Midoriya, she felt something she hadn't felt in a match since she was 12, a genuine flutter of uncertainty. Not fear. Better than fear. She'd missed this. He stood opposite her with Ikuo, her shield, not yet raised, watching her settle into her stance with those green eyes that moved like they were cataloging. He had no weapon drawn. The dummies and the cracked wall were still registering somewhere in her peripheral awareness. No weapons, she asked. I don't have one yet, he said. The uniform requisition was apparently separate from weapon assignment. Oh. She processed this. Do you need? No. She studied him for a moment across the arena floor. He was relaxed in the specific way of someone who was genuinely calm rather than performing calm, weight balanced, hands loose. He was watching her with that careful patient attention, and she had the strange feeling that he was reading her stance the way she read texts. I'll start at 50%, she said. I want to understand what I'm working with before. You don't need to adjust for me, he said, and the tone wasn't dismissive, just direct. Go at whatever you'd go at. She started at full speed. Milo extended to spear form and she came at him in the diagonal approach she used to open most matches, the one that forced a defensive choice and revealed guard preferences. He didn't choose defense. He stepped through the diagonal, inside her guard, and what he did to redirect her momentum was technical and efficient and left her spear pointing at empty air. She reset. Modified. Came at a different angle with the shield adding a second threat vector. He redirected again. Different method, same result, and this time she caught the edge of what he was doing. He was reading the trajectory before the strike launched, not from her eyes but from her weight, the distribution of force in her stance before it became motion. He was reading her preparation, not her execution. She stopped pulling and let the semblance come up, polarity, reaching for the metal framework in the arena walls, and she sent 3 combat dummies spinning at him from 3 sides simultaneously while engaging him directly from the front. He handled all 4. Not perfectly, the 3rd dummy caught his shoulder and he used the hit rather than avoiding it, absorbing the momentum and converting it into a pivot that cleared his position. But he handled 4 simultaneous targets, one of which was her at full output, in under 2 seconds, and when the movement resolved he was standing with that same balanced ease and the ghost of something at the corner of his mouth. He was interested. She felt herself grinning before she'd decided to. A real one, not the composed public-facing version. Again, she asked. Yes, he said. They went again. And again. The session that was supposed to be a 5-minute assessment stretched to 20 minutes, and the gallery had gone completely still, nobody moving, everyone watching with the focused silence of people witnessing something that was happening only once. Each exchange built on the last, she learned his tells, he learned hers, and with each round the quality of the match escalated in a way that felt less like assessment and more like conversation in a language she hadn't had a speaking partner for in years. She caught him with a clean strike to the ribcage in the 14th exchange. He took it without shifting more than 2 inches and looked at where her spear had connected with visible, undisguised satisfaction. You got me, he said. You let your right side open in the transition from the redirect, she said. I know. I'm working on that. He said it like he was actually going to go home and work on it tonight. Your footwork in the polarity multi-target sequence has a half-beat pause before the 3rd anchor point. You probably know. I've been trying to close it for a year, she said, slightly rueful. I can show you what I'd try. She looked at him across the arena floor, sweaty, her heart rate actually elevated for the first time in months, genuinely awake in a way that had nothing to do with caffeine. Yes, she said, and the word came out with more feeling than she'd intended, and she didn't take it back. Glinda's voice came from behind them both, assessment complete. A pause, in which she seemed to be deciding what to write on the form that had been designed for a very different kind of result. Mr. Midoriya. Classification, exceptional. Any remaining questions about curriculum placement will be resolved before the week is out. He nodded. Pyrrha extended her hand. He shook it, and his grip was careful in the way Yang had clocked on the bullhead, the conscious management of default force, and she filed it and everything else it implied into the part of her mind that was always working even when the rest of her was quiet. The rest of the day moved in the way days did at Beacon when something significant had happened, the news of the assessment spreading through student corridors in the accelerated, slightly distorted way of information traveling by word of mouth, arriving at each person slightly larger than it had left the last. By dinner, the version Ruby heard from a second year in the lunch line was that the transfer student had destroyed the entire assessment hall. The wall crack was real. The rest was architecture. She found Izuku in the library after classes, at a table in the back corner with 3 textbooks open around him and a focused expression. He was reading the Grimm taxonomy text with the concentrated attention of someone who was converting information directly into operational knowledge, not studying for a test but building a picture. She sat down across from him. He looked up, registered her, and the focused expression shifted into something more open. "How are you doing?" she asked. He seemed to consider the question properly. "Okay," he said. "Better than this morning." He glanced at the textbooks. "Your world has a lot of information I need to learn." "Most of it's in there," she said, nodding at the pile. "The stuff that isn't in there, I can probably tell you. Or Weiss can, and she'll do it in a more organized way. Or Blake, and she'll do it while pretending she's not also reading 4 other books at the same time." He made a small sound that might have been a laugh. It was quiet and a little rusty, like something that hadn't been used in a while. "Can I ask you something?" Ruby said. "You can ask me things, Ruby. You don't need to keep checking." She liked that. She filed it. "What was it like where you're from?" "The world, I mean. Not the fight or the falling, just the world." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the table rather than her. "Loud," he said finally. It was a loud world. People with abilities, we called them quirks, were everywhere. Normal. The cities were built around the assumption that someone on every block could do something extraordinary. He paused. There were heroes everywhere. Professionals, licensed, with agencies and rankings and merchandise. And behind all of it, something moved through his expression, was a system that was trying to hold the whole weight of human safety on the shoulders of a very small number of people who were going to eventually break under it. Did it break? A long silence. "Parts of it," he said. "The war changed things. There were people who tried to end it all, not just the system, but the idea of it. The idea that anyone had the right to protect anyone else. One man at the center of it who wanted to own every ability that had ever existed." He looked up. "I spent most of my life aimed at him. And then it was over." "And then you were here," Ruby said quietly. "And then I was here," he agreed. She reached across the table and put her hand over his, briefly, not a dramatic gesture, just the instinctive human response to someone having said something that had cost them. She pulled it back almost immediately, but she left it long enough to mean something. He looked at where her hand had been, and something in his face settled. "Thank you," he said. "For last night. The bullhead. You didn't have to cover for me." "Yes I did," she said, like it was obvious. "Because it was. You saved my team. I saved strangers." "Not anymore," she said. She stood up, gathering herself to leave. "Pyrrha wants to meet you in the East training room at 7 tomorrow. She said to tell you she found the fix for the half-beat pause and she wants to show you." Something lit behind his eyes, the specific light of someone who got excited about technical problems in combat the way some people got excited about puzzles. "I'll be there," he said. Ruby smiled at him and left him to his textbooks, walking out through the library with the warm, settled feeling of a person who had made a correct call and knew it, even if she couldn't have written out the reasoning in full sentences. Some things you knew in the chest rather than the head. She'd learned to trust those. Outside, Beacon was moving toward evening, the long shadows of the towers stretching across the courtyard, students in clusters, the smell of the city coming up from below on the wind. Somewhere in the East Wing, Weiss was rewriting notes. In the cafeteria, Yang was already at dinner with Nora and Ren, probably being loud and happy about it. Blake was wherever Blake went when she needed air. And in the back corner of the library, Izuku Midoriya was reading about Grimm with the focused attention of a man building a map of a new world, and the new world was, slowly, carefully, beginning to make room for him. Chapter 3, Fault Lines. 3 weeks changed things. Not dramatically, not in the way that made for clean stories with clear before and after markers. More the way a river changed a bank, gradually, consistently, until one morning you looked and the landscape was different and you couldn't pinpoint the exact moment it had shifted. Izuku had been at Beacon for 3 weeks and the academy had rearranged itself around him the way water rearranged itself around a new stone in the current. He ran at 4:30 every morning now. Yang joined him at 5:30 on Tuesdays and Thursdays, which she claimed was purely about optimizing her own training schedule, a claim nobody believed including her. He and Pyrrha trained together every evening in the East training room, working through the kind of technical exchange that both of them had been starved for, she sharpening angles he'd never had to think about before, him showing her pressure point combinations she incorporated into her style with frightening efficiency. Within a week she'd closed the half-beat pause. Within 2 she'd found 3 places where his own footwork was carrying old scar tissue from fights he'd had years ago, inefficiencies his body had built around damage and then never corrected. Here, she said one evening, pressing 2 fingers to the outside of his left knee during a form review. You're rotating 4 degrees inward on the plant. Every time. You compensate with your hip but it costs you 2 inches of reach and 1/10 of a second on the follow. He looked down at his own knee. I broke it, he said simply. Long time ago. Badly. She kept her fingers where they were, reading the joint. The break healed but the movement pattern didn't update. She wasn't being clinical about it, her voice had the texture of someone treating something carefully. We can retrain it. How long? A week, she said. 2, if you're stubborn about it. He looked at her. Stubborn? Most people are, about the body patterns that kept them alive, she said. They feel like safety even when they've stopped being useful. He was quiet for a moment, sitting with the accuracy of that. 1 week, he said. She smiled, which she did more freely now than she had in the first days. Less of the composed public version, more of the real one that started in her eyes. Pyrrha was the one thing he hadn't quite found the right language for yet. What was happening in that training room every evening was something he'd only had once before, with a person he'd loved like a brother and nearly lost, and the quality of it, the particular intimacy of understanding someone through the way they moved and being understood the same way back, was something he was still learning to hold without flinching. She'd told him, on the 5th day, why she always fought alone. Sitting on the training room floor after sparring, toweling off, voice matter-of-fact in the way of someone who'd explained it before but never to the right audience. The tournaments. The reputation. The way people either admired her from a careful distance or came at her trying to be the first one to knock her down, and how both options had left her essentially solitary inside a life that looked very full from the outside. When you saw me in the gallery, she said, you said I wasn't being challenged. I said it looked like you weren't pushing, he corrected. Same thing. She looked at her hands. I've been waiting for someone to push back properly. A pause. I'd started to think it might not happen. It happened, he said. She looked up at him and held the eye contact for just a beat longer than necessary, and then nodded, and went back to her water bottle, and the conversation moved on, but something in the room had shifted and neither of them acknowledged it directly because they were both, in their different ways, people who process things by letting them settle before picking them up. Cinder Fall moved through the Beacon campus like weather. That was the best way Ruby could describe it, she was always there when she was relevant and never where you'd think to look for her otherwise. 3rd year, transfer from Haven, with a record of academic excellence and a combat assessment that was legitimately impressive even in a school full of impressive combatants. Smooth. Polished. The kind of beautiful that made people look first and think second, which Ruby recognized as a skill rather than just a fact. She showed up in the East training room on a Tuesday, which was not one of Pyrrha's usual days, which meant she'd either checked the schedule or guessed. Izuku was alone, running movement drills, and he noticed her before she announced herself. She saw his head track toward the door a half-second before she pushed it open, which was the first thing she filed about him. Alert. Real alert, not the performed awareness of someone who'd learned to look ready. The famous transfer student, she said, stepping into the room. She had a scroll in one hand, casual, like she'd just been passing by with somewhere else to be. I wanted to see if the assessment rumors were accurate. Depends on which rumors, he said, not stopping the drill. The one where you cracked the assessment wall. She glanced at the room's reinforced panels. And the one where Pyrrha Nikos came off the floor smiling for the first time anyone can remember. Both accurate, he said, completing the sequence and coming to a stop. He looked at her properly now. Cinder Fall. She raised an eyebrow. You know my name. I made a point of learning who was notable, he said. You're notable. It was a statement rather than a compliment, and she read it correctly, which was one of the interesting things about her. Most people received factual acknowledgement and filtered it through their own ego first. She kept it level and returned his look with something equally assessing. Third year, she said. Haven transfer. Combat specialty, dust manipulation, semblance classified. She smiled, and it was elegant and precise. I imagine you've already learned all of that. Most of it, he said. The semblance classification is interesting. It's a privacy right. Everything's a privacy right until it isn't, he said. I don't have one. A semblance, I mean. What I have isn't classifiable in your system. She was very still for a moment in the way of someone choosing not to react rather than having nothing to react to. One for all, she said. He went still. She registered it and kept her expression pleasant. It's a remarkable thing to hear about. A power with no ceiling, transferred down a line, that grows in the using. She tilted her head. Where I was raised, the principle that ability is inherited by those worthy to receive it was considered foundational. Where were you raised? He asked. Somewhere that didn't deserve me, she said, and the line was delivered lightly but landed with a weight that was entirely intentional. She moved toward the door, her job here apparently complete. I look forward to watching you compete at the Vital Festival, Midoriya. She left. He stood in the empty training room and thought about the specific manner in which she had known the name of his power, which was a name he had used exactly twice in conversation at Beacon, once with Ojban, in a room that was presumably private, and once with Yang in the early morning training grounds, when the facility was supposedly empty. He thought about that for a long time. The Vital Festival was 3 weeks out, which meant Beacon was operating at a particular frequency of controlled anxiety, the kind that expressed itself in longer training hours and shorter tempers and impromptu sparring matches in corridors that Glinda was pretending not to notice. Teams were finalizing rosters, individual competitors were declaring, and the whole enterprise had the building pressure of something everyone had been working toward and nobody was quite ready for. Ruby found Weiss in their dorm at 11:30 doing what she called revision and what Yang called panicking with organizational structure. The Schnee Dust Company Air's scroll was open to a tournament bracket analysis she built from 3 years of Vital Festival records, cross-referenced with current Beacon rankings that had been, notably, reorganized at the top in the past 3 weeks. He should compete, Weiss said, before Ruby could open her mouth. I came in to ask if you wanted tea, Ruby said. He should compete in the individual bracket, Weiss continued, without pausing. His ranking would place him at the top of the seeding, which would mean the other academies will have to plan for an unknown variable with no documented semblance and no fight footage. It's strategically valuable. Ruby sat on her bed. Did you run this by him? I'm running it by you first. Why? Weiss looked up from the scroll. For a moment, behind the efficiency and the architecture of perfectly composed strategy, there was something more unguarded. Because you're better at knowing how to say things to him. Ruby blinked. What? Don't make it a thing, Weiss said, looking back at her scroll. You talk to him in a way that he actually receives. I talk to him and he listens, but I can see him translating, accommodating. With you he doesn't do that. He does that with Pyrrha too, Ruby said. That's different, Weiss said, with a precision that suggested she'd already classified the distinction. Ruby thought about asking what different meant, but Weiss had the look of someone who'd already shared more than planned and was preparing to close back up. I'll talk to him, she said. About the festival. Thank you. Weiss made a note. Then, without looking up, he fixed Yang's right cross. I've been watching her spar and it's noticeably improved. Yang mentioned he adjusted her shoulder position. He did it in 3 sentences in a training session he wasn't supposed to be part of. Weiss paused, pen hovering. He has a way of seeing people. She said it like she was considering whether to file it as a liability or an asset and hadn't decided yet. I think that's just who he is, Ruby said. I know. Another pause. She stopped, started again. Where I come from, people see what they want to see and fit you into the shape they already decided on. He doesn't do that. Ruby watched her. Weiss was looking at the bracket analysis, but she wasn't really reading it. No, Ruby agreed quietly. He doesn't. She found him the next morning on the North Observation Deck, which was technically a maintenance access platform that 3 students out of the entire academy had discovered had an unrestricted view of both the city and the ocean beyond it. Ruby had found it in her first month. Blake had found it 2 weeks after Ruby. Izuku, apparently, had found it in his first week, probably during a 4:30 run that took him somewhere he hadn't been before. He was standing at the railing with a mug of coffee from the cafeteria and his scroll open to the Grimm taxonomy text, reading in the early morning quiet. She climbed the last ladder rung and stepped onto the platform. You found my spot, she said. Your name isn't on it, he said, and there was a dry edge to it that was new. He'd been doing that more lately, the subtle humor surfacing once he'd settled into a space. It appeared without announcement and disappeared the same way. She stood next to him at the railing. The city was golden in the early sun, veils spreading all the way to the water, the distant smudge of the Grimm lands on the far horizon doing what it always did, sitting there reminding you what the brightness was all about. Weiss wants you to enter the Vital Festival individual bracket, she said. I know, he said. She left a 3-page analysis on the dining table this morning with a sticky note that said consider this. Ruby snorted. That's very Weiss. I appreciated the research. He looked at the city. She built the argument on strategic value to the team, but that's not the real point. What's the real point? She wants to see if I can win, he said. It wasn't arrogant. It was just him reading a situation accurately, which he did the way other people breathed. She's been building a mental model of me since the assessment and she wants to test it against live data. Ruby considered this. Is that a bad reason to compete? No, he said. It's honest. He sipped the coffee. I'll enter. Okay. She leaned on the railing beside him. Can I ask you something? Ruby. Right, yes, I know, I don't need to check. She gathered herself. Cinder Fall. I saw her go into the training room when you were there alone 2 nights ago. She came out 12 minutes later. What was that? He was quiet for a moment, which was its own kind of answer. She knows things she shouldn't, he said. About me. Specific things. The name of my ability, not the mechanics of it, but the name. That's a detail from a conversation that shouldn't have left a private room. Ruby felt something go cold and specific in her chest. Ojban's office. The most likely source, yes. Which means either Ojban has a leak somewhere in his staff, or something else. He turned the coffee mug in his hands. She also framed herself very carefully. Everything she said was technically neutral, but the subtext was, she was taking a reading. Calibrating. Calibrating for what? I don't know yet, he said. But she's not just a third-year student with a classified semblance. He looked at Ruby directly. I grew up in a world where the most dangerous people were the ones who moved around the edges of everything, touching the picture without being in it. She has that quality. Ruby thought about what to do with that. The right move was probably to tell Ozpin. The complicated thing was that Ozpin was the node through which the information had apparently leaked, and that was a tangle she didn't have enough thread to follow yet. What do we do? She said. We watch, he said. Carefully. And we don't let her know we're watching. That sounds like patience. I have a lot of it, he said. She believed him. She filed it next to everything else she was filing about him, the early mornings, the scars, the careful grip, the way he said I'm fine and I'll enter with the same matter-of-fact weight as if both were equally simple decisions. She was building her own mental model, she realized. She'd been doing it since the cargo door. She just hadn't organized it into a 3-page analysis with a sticky note. Below them the city opened up into its morning self, and the ocean caught the light, and the Grimm lands on the horizon were just a smudge. I like it up here, Izuku said, looking out. I know, Ruby said. Me too. The team meeting happened that afternoon, the 4 of them around the dorm room table with the particular charged energy of people who had individually processed a thing and were now bringing those processes into the same room. Weiss had her scroll out. Young was sitting backwards on her chair. Blake was in the window seat with the afternoon light behind her. Cinder Fall, Weiss said, opening without preamble. What do we actually know? 3rd year, Haven transfer, Blake said from the window. She arrived 14 months ago. Her application file is cleaner than any real file I've ever seen, which itself is a data point. Everyone looked at her. In the White Fang, Blake said, with the evenness of someone who'd had a long time to decide to be direct about it, the people who made the cleanest files were the ones who had something to hide. Real histories leave texture. Hers is smooth. Weiss was making notes. Her combat record is legitimate, I've watched footage. The semblance privacy classification is unusual but not unheard of. What is unusual is that she spends a disproportionate amount of time in areas of the campus adjacent to communications infrastructure. Say that in regular language, Yang said. She's near the CCT relay points a lot, Weiss said. The ones that handle scroll network routing and encrypted message traffic. She's tapping something? Ruby asked. Or delivering something, Blake said. The White Fang has a presence in Vale. It's been moving in a direction some of us, a pause, brief, don't agree with. Adam's faction has been acquiring resources that make no sense for a civil rights movement and every sense for something else. You think she's connected to Adam, Yang said, and her voice had gone flat in the specific way it went flat when Adam Taurus came up. I think she's connected to something larger than herself, Blake said. And I think whatever it is needs access to Beacon's infrastructure. She looked at Ruby. Izuku said she knows about his ability. The name. From Ozpin's office. Can she access the office communications? Ruby asked. Not directly, Weiss said. But if there's a tap on the CCT relay, she stopped. Ozpin needs to know. Izuku said watch and don't show that we're watching, Ruby said. Izuku isn't an expert on Remnant's infrastructure, Weiss said, not dismissively, she was just being accurate. He's an expert on people who move around the edges of things, Blake said from the window. I'd factor that in. They sat with it for a moment. The afternoon light shifted. Below them, the academy moved through its afternoon pace, students and faculty and the machinery of a school that had been running for a very long time on foundations that were, apparently, not entirely solid. We watch, Ruby said. For now. Carefully. And we figure out what she's actually after before we move. She looked around the table. Agreed? Yang tipped her chair back onto 4 legs. I hate patience. I know, Ruby said. Fine, Yang said. Agreed. Nora Valkyrie found Izuku in the cafeteria that evening by sitting down directly across from him and placing both elbows on the table with the energy of someone who had been wanting to do this for a while and had finally allocated the time. Okay, she said. I need to know about the punch. Izuku looked up from his dinner. Which one? The punch. The Beowulf punch. The crater punch. Ruby said it sounded like a thunderclap and Yang said the Beowulf just stopped existing and Ren says that's probably hyperbole but I think Ren is being boring. Ren appeared, setting his tray down beside Nora with the quiet resignation of someone who had been following Nora into things for most of his life and had long since made his peace with it. I said the exact description of stopped existing was likely, he made a crater with his feet, Ren. Also his feet. When he landed. Yang told me. She's accurate, Izuku said. Nora's eyes went wide. Then she slammed both palms on the table. I knew it. Ren. Ren, he confirmed it, I heard, Ren said patiently. Can you teach me that? Not the landing crater thing, I have Magnhild for the landing thing, I mean the punch thing. The force multiplying thing. Is it a technique or is it intrinsic? Because if it's a technique, it's intrinsic, Izuku said. It can't be taught because it's specific to what I carry. But, he watched her face fall for a fraction of a second and felt the impulse that had driven him to fix Yang's right cross, the force multiplication in your hammer strikes isn't just Magnhild. You generate significant momentum through your swing path. If you change the grip point on the recovery you could increase the follow-up strike force by maybe 20%. Nora stared at him. Also your footwork in close-range exchanges could use, Ren, Nora said, without taking her eyes off Izuku, he's fixing my fighting. I'm aware, Ren said. Is he doing this to everyone? Essentially yes, Ren said. She pointed at Izuku. You're coming to our next training session. Okay, he said. And you're going to tell me more about the world you came from because Ruby said it had people with abilities everywhere and I have 7,000 questions. Nora, Ren said. 5,000, she amended. Maybe start with 5, Izuku said, and picked up his fork, and Nora immediately began question 1 with a velocity that suggested she'd been holding it for some time, and Ren watched his partner light up across the table and looked at Izuku with an expression that was quiet and genuine. She hasn't had a new training partner in a while, Ren said, under Nora's rapid-fire questioning. She gets bored when she's not challenged. I can tell, Izuku said. So can I, Ren said, and I appreciate it. He said it simply, the way Ren did most things, without excess, without performance, but with a weight that meant it landed fully. Izuku nodded. Nora had arrived at question 3, which concerned whether his world had anyone with a hammer-based ability and whether they could beat her, and the cafeteria was warm and full of the sound of people, and it was the first evening since he'd arrived that his chest felt something approaching settled without having to consciously talk it into it. Pyrrha found him after dinner, on the path between the cafeteria and the east wing. She'd clearly come from her own late training session, hair down, slightly damp, jacket over one arm. She fell into step beside him without preamble, which was one of the things he liked about her. She didn't perform arrivals. I heard Nora recruited you, she said. She asked 7,000 questions about my world. She pared it down to 7,000. 5, allegedly. Pyrrha made the real smile, the one that started in her eyes. They walked in comfortable quiet for a moment, the evening air carrying the smell of the cliffs and the distant water. You filed something earlier, she said. In the training room. When I mentioned the movement patterns people keep because they kept them alive. He looked at her. You did the thing where you go somewhere briefly and come back, she said. Not accusatory, observational, gentle. I've been learning your tells. I know, he said. You're getting better at it. What was it? He walked 3 more steps before answering. A friend of mine, he said. From before. He had patterns like that, built around damage, kept past the point of usefulness. We spent a long time working on them together. He paused. He's back in my world. Along with everyone else. He stopped. You left people, she said. I didn't choose to, he said. I know. She was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry. He started. Don't say it's fine, she said, and there was nothing harsh in it, just a directness that matched his own. You're allowed to not be fine about it. He stopped walking. She stopped too, and looked at him in the evening light, and she had this quality, he'd noticed it from the beginning, from the gallery, from the arena floor, of being entirely present. Not waiting for her turn, not processing something else behind her eyes. Just there. I know, he said. I'm working on it. I know you are, she said. You work on everything. It was said with the kind of affection that had developed over 3 weeks of evenings in a training room, sharing the specific intimacy of genuine challenge. You're allowed to let some of it be worked on slowly. He held her gaze for a moment, long enough that the evening wind moved between them and didn't break anything. Your half-beat pause is completely gone, he said, because that was the language they had, and she knew what it meant. I know, she said, with the smile. You're down to 3 degrees of inward rotation on the plant. Was 4 yesterday. 1 week, he said. You're not stubborn, she said. I was wrong about that. They started walking again. The east wing lights were warm in the windows ahead. Somewhere in there, Ruby was probably still awake, and Yang was probably already asleep, and Weiss was probably revising something. Blake was probably in the window with a book. The Vital Festival, Pyrrha said. Are you entering? Individual bracket. Weiss made a very thorough argument. She would. A pause. I'm entering too. I know, he said. I expected you would. We might face each other, she said. There was something in her voice that was complicated, not dread, not eagerness, something in between that held both. We might, he said. And you won't, no, he said, before she finished. I won't pull anything. She exhaled, and it carried something that might have been relief and might have been something adjacent to anticipation. Good, she said, and they reached the east wing door, and she held it open for him, which made him hold it back for her, and they stood there briefly in the narrow exchange of small courtesy before she laughed, really laughed, a short unguarded sound, and went through first. The door closed behind them. The corridor was warm and quiet. Down the hall, Ruby's door was open a crack, and light spilled through it onto the stone floor, and voices came through, Ruby and Weiss, something about the festival brackets, animated and specific. The sound of people building something together. He went to his room and sat on the bed and opened his scroll to the Grimm taxonomy text, but he didn't read it. He sat there in the quiet and let the weight of the day be what it was, not too much and not nothing, just a day in a world that was becoming, slowly, actually his. Through the wall he heard Ruby laugh at something Weiss said. He let himself smile. The scroll screen went dark after a minute of inactivity. He didn't turn it back on. Outside the window, the city was doing what it always did, and in the Grimlands on the horizon something large was moving through the dark, drawn toward the concentrated warmth of a lit city the way Grimm always were, but it was far off, and between it and here stood every wall and every person and every lit window of a school that, for all its fault lines and cracked foundations, was still standing. He stretched out on the bed, and the ceiling was the same as every other night, and it was fine. Tomorrow, the festival training intensified. Cinder was watching and he was watching Cinder. Pyrrha had 1 week of footwork correction left. Yang needed someone to push her past the ceiling she'd hit. Nora had 4,993 questions remaining. Blake was circling something she hadn't told him yet but would, when she was ready. Weiss was revising a model of him that kept requiring updates, and he found that privately satisfying. Ruby was awake with the light on, building towards something he couldn't fully see yet but recognized in shape, the shape of a person who had decided, without making a declaration of it, to be in your corner. He closed his eyes. 3 weeks had changed things. 3 more weeks would change them again. Whatever Cinder was building in the spaces between the beacon's infrastructure, she was doing it because something was coming, and whatever was coming, it was coming with the festival. He knew that shape too. He'd walked toward it his entire life. Chapter 4, The Fall Before the Fall. The tap was in the East Relay Junction, 3rd floor of the communications tower, behind a panel that had been opened and resealed with a precision that would have fooled anyone who wasn't looking specifically for it. Blake found it on a Thursday. She didn't tell anyone immediately, which was a Blake thing. She needed to understand what she was looking at before she brought it to the table, because bringing incomplete information to people who acted on information was how you caused damage you couldn't walk back. She photographed it with her scroll, resealed the panel exactly as she'd found it, and walked back to the dormitory with the photographs and the cold, specific feeling of someone who has confirmed something they hoped was wrong. She told Izuku first, which surprised her slightly when she noticed herself doing it. She'd gone to his door rather than Ruby's, and she stood in the corridor for a moment after knocking, wondering when that had become her instinct, and concluded that it was because he was the one who had named what Cinder was before any of them had proof, and bringing proof to the person who'd built the hypothesis first was just logical. He opened the door. He read her face before she said anything. "Come in," he said, stepping back. She laid the photographs on his desk. He looked at them without touching them, which was a good instinct, treating evidence like evidence. He bent over the images and was quiet for 30 seconds, and when he straightened he had the expression she'd learned to recognize as his operational face, everything personal going behind glass, the thinking becoming clean and structural. "How long has it been there?" he asked. "Impossible to say exactly. The dust accumulation on the panel repair points to at least 6 weeks, but the tap itself is newer. Maybe 3. Since I arrived. Around then, yes." He looked at the photographs again. "This isn't White Fang tech," he said. Blake stilled. "How do you know what White Fang tech looks like?" "I don't," he said. "But you do, and you recognized it as something before you came here, and whatever it is it's making you more uncomfortable than a tap should by itself." He met her eyes. "It's something bigger." She held his gaze for a moment. "Then, there's a group. Not a name I know completely. But the Fong's been moving resources in a direction that a lot of us didn't sign up for, and the name at the center of that movement keeps connecting to things that look exactly like this." She touched the edge of one photograph. "Someone with power and patience who's been building toward a specific event." "The festival," he said. "The festival," she agreed. 40,000 people in one place. Every major kingdom represented. The communications infrastructure running at maximum load. Every Huntsman Academy's best students on display. She paused. "If you wanted to break something, it's the perfect moment. What specifically are they trying to break?" She was quiet for a beat. "I think they're trying to break Beacon." The room was still. Through the window the campus moved in its late afternoon pace, students crossing the courtyard, the towers catching the low sun. "Tell me everything you know," he said. "Not the overview." "Everything." So she did. It took 40 minutes and a cup of tea that went cold on his desk, and she told him about the White Fang and Adam and the drift toward violence and the things she'd seen and done and the reasons she'd run, and she told him without the careful framing she used with most people because he listened the way she needed to be listened to, without flinching, without interrupting to reassure her, just receiving it accurately. When she finished he was quiet for a moment. "You've been carrying this alone," he said. "I couldn't tell the others without. I know why you didn't," he said. "I'm not criticizing. I'm saying," he stopped, choosing the words carefully, "you don't have to carry the things you know alone just because you're the one who found them. That's not what being part of something means." She looked at her hands. "It's a habit," she said. "I know that one," he said. "We'll work on it." She looked up and found him watching her with something that was direct and warm and entirely without pity, and she thought about what Ren had said about having a new training partner, that Nora hadn't been challenged in a while. Blake had her own version of that problem, she realized. Not combat. Something else. What are we going to do, she said. We're going to be smarter than she is, he said. And we're going to move first. He brought it to the full team that night, Blake beside him, and he laid it out clean and without drama, the tap, Cinder's movements, the timeline, the festival as the focal point. He watched each of them absorb it, Ruby going still and serious in the way she did when her natural momentum got redirected into something more precise, Yang's jaw tightening around a stillness that was more dangerous than her loudness, Weiss making notes with a controlled quality that meant she was managing something more than strategy. Ojban needs to know, Weiss said. This isn't optional. I agree, Izuku said. But not everything. Not yet. Explain that. We tell him there's an active intelligence tap on the CCT relay. We do not tell him everything Blake knows about the White Fang connection, because that's Blake's information and Blake's history and she gets to decide how much of it leaves this room. He looked at Weiss. Ojban will move on the tap. That's useful. It'll also tell us how much of his response is compromised, because if Cinder has access to his office communications she'll know within hours that we found it. And then we watch what she does, Ruby said. And then we watch what she does, he confirmed. That's genuinely clever, Weiss said, in the tone of someone slightly annoyed at finding something clever she hadn't thought of first. What do we do about her directly? Yang asked. Because she stopped, unclenched her hands, I'm not great at watching. I know, Izuku said. You're going to do something more useful than watching. He looked at her steadily. You're going to compete in the festival at full capacity, publicly, and make sure every camera and every broadcaster knows exactly what Yang Xiaolong looks like operating without a ceiling. Yang blinked. She needs to know what she's facing, he said. If we make that information easy to read, she'll plan around it. Plans built around accurate information are more predictable than plans built around uncertainty. You want to use us as bait, Yang said. I want to use us as the most visible, loudest, most undeniably dangerous team at the festival, he said. Which we are. It's not bait. It's truth. He paused. And while Cinder is watching the truth, we dismantle the parts of her operation she doesn't think we can see. Ruby looked around the table. Agreed? One by one, Yang's nod, which was followed immediately by the full grin replacing the tension. Weiss, deliberate. Blake, quiet and certain. Agreed, they said. He went to Ojban the next morning alone. The elevator ride up was the same as the first time, long enough for most people to arrive anxious. He arrived the same way he arrived everywhere. The office was morning lit and Ojban was behind the desk with Coco, and the gears in the walls were turning, and Glinda was standing to the side with the riding crop and an expression that shifted slightly when he walked in, something adjusting in her assessment of him that she kept professionally contained. He told Ojban about the tap. Location, specifications, approximate timeline. He told it as a student who had discovered something and was bringing it to the appropriate authority, which was exactly what it was. Ojban listened without interrupting, which was a skill not enough people had. When Izuku finished, the headmaster set down his mug and looked at the middle distance for a moment with those eyes that carried decades. You're telling me there's an active intelligence tap on our primary communications relay, Ojban said. And you're bringing this to me now, several days after it was discovered, having photographed it and analyzed the timeline first. Yes, Izuku said. Rather than immediately. Immediate reporting before analysis gives the other side more information than it costs them, Izuku said. The tap stays in place until you're ready to move on it, which means she doesn't know we know, which means we have an operational window. Ojban looked at him with something that had moved past assessment into something warmer. You've done this before, he said. Not a question. Different world, same principles, Izuku said. A pause. The gears turned. There's something you're not telling me, Ojpin said, with the particular calm of someone who was used to being inside incomplete pictures. Yes, Izuku said, because lying to Ojpin was both disrespectful and strategically stupid. It's not mine to tell. When it becomes mine, I will. Ojpin held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. The tap will be handled. By whom is my concern rather than yours? He folded his hands. The festival begins in 12 days. Your bracket seeding was finalized this morning, you're top of the first cohort, as expected. I know. Your opponents will have no footage of your combat. They will attempt to probe your capabilities in the match itself, which puts them at a persistent disadvantage. He paused. I want you to win, Mr. Midoriya. Cleanly and visibly. Beacon's reputation has been complicated recently, by events I can't fully detail. A clear, undeniable demonstration of strength has value beyond the trophy. Izuku thought about the fault lines he'd been walking since he arrived. The institution with cracks running through it, the students who were exceptional trying to hold it up with skill and will and loyalty to an idea that might not fully deserve that loyalty yet. I'll win, he said. I don't doubt it, Ojpin said. He picked up his mug. And Mr. Midoriya, the East Relay Junction will be under observation from tonight. Whatever moves next will move in the open. Good, Izuku said, and meant it, and left. Cinder found him that afternoon, and this time she didn't pretend it was casual. She was on the south training terrace alone, in training clothes, with a pair of black blades that moved through forms she'd clearly invented herself rather than learned, too personal, too specific to be curriculum. She stopped when he stepped onto the terrace and looked at him directly. You reported the tap, she said. Yes, he said. I knew you would within 2 days of it being found. You're predictable in the ways that matter. She twirled one blade once, an unconscious habit, the way some people clicked pens. You don't hide things. You use them. You were testing whether I'd hold it or spend it, he said. The answer is neither. I reported it and kept the window. She smiled. The one that was elegant and precise and had nothing warm underneath. There are other taps, she said. You know that. I assumed, he said. You'll find them, she said. You're thorough. But for every one you find, the information that matters is already somewhere it needs to be. She tilted her head. I've been trying to figure out what you want, Midoriya. Most people want something clear, safety, recognition, belonging. You want, she paused, genuinely thinking, which was something, you want something I don't have a clean word for. Then you don't have me figured out, he said. Not yet, she agreed. The blades came up, not in a threatening way, an offering. Spar with me. He looked at the blades, then at her. Why? Because I want to see it, she said. In person. Not a recording, not a second-hand account. You. Something in her expression shifted, and for a moment the elegance fell away and there was something underneath that was raw, not weakness, but ambition, which was its own kind of exposure. I've spent a very long time being the most dangerous person in any room I walked into. And then you landed in my world and I need to know. He understood that. He'd been that person once, on the other side of the equation, the one desperately trying to close the distance to someone who'd never been touched. No weapons, he said. I don't have mine yet. I know. She set the blades down on the bench beside the terrace. Hand to hand. He rolled his shoulders. She settled into a stance that was genuinely impressive, low center of gravity, weight forward, hands in a guard that spoke to real training rather than performance. He didn't raise a guard. He stood in the open stance he used when he wasn't sure how fast something was going to be. She came fast. Not the fastest thing he'd ever faced, but fast by any reasonable measure, her footwork was extraordinary, she covered ground in a way that made her effective range larger than her physical reach, and the first strike she threw was a feint that became a sweep that became a shoulder drive in 3 connected beats. He stepped through all 3, because the feint telegraphed in her weight before it launched and the sweep committed her left side and the shoulder drive was her natural close-range solution when the first 2 were avoided, and he'd read that sequence by the second beat. She reset. Her expression had shifted, the elegant neutrality gone, something sharper in its place. She came again, faster, with a level of intent that was more real than the first exchange, and they went 4 rounds of movement before he redirected her third strike with a palm block and used her momentum to step behind her and she was facing the wrong direction. She stopped. Stood still for a moment. Then turned around slowly. "There it is," she said quietly. "There it is," he agreed. Something worked through her expression, not defeat, not anger, something more complicated. The look of a person who has been building a worldview on a specific foundation and has just had 1 brick removed that they can't easily replace. "You're not fighting me seriously," she said. "No," he said. "Would you?" "If you gave me a reason," he said. She looked at him across the training terrace, and the afternoon light was gold on the stone, and the city was doing its city things below, and the festival banners were going up on the outer walls. "I think you're going to be a problem," she said, but the tone had no hostility in it. It was almost admiring. "You're already a problem," he said. "I'd prefer we weren't problems for each other." She picked up her blades from the bench. "That's not how this ends," she said, and turned and walked off the terrace. He stood where he was for a moment, watching her go. She was remarkable in her way, intelligent, technically gifted, carrying something underneath the ambition that he recognized as damage-seeking direction. He felt no contempt for it. He'd grown up surrounded by people who'd taken damage and chosen what to do with it. The difference was the direction chosen. He went to find Yang. The festival's first public training event was 4 days out, and the training grounds were operating at maximum capacity from 6 in the morning until 10 at night, teams from Beacon and Haven and the early arriving Atlas delegation sharing space with the particular charged energy of people who were competitive by nature being competitive in close proximity. The Atlas students were interesting. Technically proficient, trained to a standard that was undeniably high, with a precision that made them look like tools rather than people until you watched long enough to see the individuality under the polish. Their lead competitor was a girl with white hair and a scar across her nose who fought with a semblance that froze everything it touched and an expression that made Weiss look relaxed. Winter Schnee's face when she saw her sister across the training grounds was a complicated novel in 2 seconds. Weiss's face was equally complicated, in the same genre, and Izuku watched both of them process the other's presence with the specific paralysis of a relationship that had never been resolved. He filed it. Yang appeared at his elbow. "Drama," she said, with the tone of someone who appreciated drama the way a person appreciated weather. "Family," he said. "Sometimes the same thing," Yang said. Pyrrha arrived beside them a moment later, slightly warm from her own training session, hair in its competition braid. She tracked his sightline to Winter and Weiss and made a small sound of recognition. "The Schnee family relationship is, I know," he said. "You don't, actually. Not all of it." He looked at her. Winter's Atlas posting was partially arranged to remove her from the family estate, Pyrrha said, quietly enough for just the 3 of them. She was the first Schnee heir in 2 generations to demonstrate a semblance powerful enough to inherit the leadership role. Jacques Schnee didn't want competition. He exiled his own daughter, Yang said flatly. "Arranged it so she exiled herself," Pyrrha said. "By making Atlas military service the only space where she could be what she is without being managed." She looked at Weiss across the grounds. "Weiss knows. They haven't talked about it directly." Izuku watched Weiss and Winter across the distance. Weiss had straightened into something formal, the public version of herself, the Schnee heir, the composed professional. Winter was matching it, because she'd learned the same adaptation at the same table. 2 people using the same armor against each other. Someone should close that gap before it gets used against both of them, he said. Someone, Yang said, with a pointed look at him. I don't know them well enough yet. You're better at it than any of us, Pyrrha said. At seeing what people are carrying. He thought about that for a moment. Then he walked across the training grounds toward where Weiss and Winter were doing their careful, formal dance. He stopped beside Weiss, casually, like they'd been heading the same direction. Weiss, he said. She looked at him with the expression of someone grateful for an interruption and unwilling to show it. Midoriya. Is this your sister? He looked at Winter directly, without the particular deference most people offered an Atlas officer. I've heard you're exceptional. Winter's ice-gray eyes assessed him in under a second. She'd heard of him, he could see it, the assessment had a pre-existing framework behind it. The transfer student, she said. Izuku Midoriya, he said. Your sister talks about you. Does she? Not enough, he said simply, and looked at Weiss, and something in his tone put the sentence in a context that wasn't operational or formal, just true, and Weiss's composure shifted in the specific microscopic way it did when something got through. Winter, Weiss started. We'll talk, Winter said, to her sister, and the two words were stripped of all the Atlas officer architecture and were just two words from a person to a person, and they landed. He stepped back and let them find their way into a conversation that was going to be incomplete and awkward and probably necessary, and he went back to Yang and Pyrrha. Told you, Yang said. That took 30 seconds, Pyrrha said, and she was watching him with the expression that had been happening more frequently recently, the one where she was looking at him the way he sometimes looked at her, with something that had moved past assessment into something that didn't have a clean analytical name. The hard part wasn't today, he said. That was just a door. The hard part is what they do with the hallway. Still, Pyrrha said. He shrugged. She held his gaze for the beat he was beginning to know, the one where she decided to say the next thing or not. This time she let it pass, which meant it was going in the direction of eventually rather than today, and that was fine. He was learning to read eventually from her too. 3 days before the festival began, he found the second tap. Not in the communications tower this time, in the broadcast relay underneath the festival arena itself, in the access tunnels that ran beneath the public seating. He'd gone down there on the pretense of route familiarization, which was something he genuinely did before any unfamiliar combat space, and he'd found a relay box with a device on it that was more sophisticated than the first one. He photographed it, left it in place, and went directly to Ojban. Ojban looked at the photographs and then at Izuku with an expression that was past surprised and into something more serious. The first tap was communications, Izuku said. This one is in the broadcast relay. She's not just listening. She's planning to transmit. Transmit what? Ojban said. I don't know yet. But 40,000 people watching the festival are also 40,000 pairs of eyes attached to scrolls. If she can hijack the broadcast relay, she can put anything on every screen in the arena. He paused. And whatever she puts there will be designed to do something specific to the crowd. Fear, Ojban said. Grimm, Izuku said. The room was very still. Fear draws Grimm, Ojban said, and he said it like a man saying something he'd known for a long time and had been hoping wasn't relevant. A crowd of 40,000 experiencing a directed fear event would generate an attraction signal large enough to pull every Grimm within 100 kilometers, Izuku said. While your best students are all in one place and your communications infrastructure is compromised. Ojban stood up. He was not a man who made dramatic gestures, Izuku had learned, he processed first and then moved with deliberate intent. The standing up meant he was done processing. I need to know the rest, Ojban said. What you haven't told me. Izuku was quiet for a moment. Then he thought about Blake in his room with cold tea and photographs, carrying it alone because she was used to carrying things alone, and he thought about what he told her. It's not mine to tell, he said. But I'll ask the person it belongs to. How long? Today, he said. He found Blake on the north observation deck, which had become something of a shared space among the people who needed quiet. He'd found Ruby there once, and Pyrrha twice, and once both of them together in a comfortable silence. Blake was in her usual position, book open, not really reading. She looked up when he stepped onto the platform. "Ozpin needs to hear it," he said. She looked at the horizon for a moment, the city, the water, the smudge of Grimlands on the far edge. Then she closed the book. "All right," she said. "You don't have to go in alone," he said. "I'll be there." She looked at him. The gold eyes did the thing they did when she was recalibrating, and then she nodded. "I know," she said. And something in the way she said it was different from the Blake who had knocked on his door with photographs and cold tea, more solid, less braced against the weight of it. Like the weight was the same but the distribution had changed. They went to Ozpin together, and she told him what she knew, and Izuku sat beside her the entire time, and when Ozpin asked difficult questions and Blake's answers got complicated, Izuku didn't jump in to smooth it or redirect, just stayed present in the way she'd needed him to be present, and let the room receive what Blake offered at the pace she offered it. Ozpin listened to everything. He asked 3 questions. He was quiet for a long time afterward. "The White Fang faction you're describing," he said finally, "has been escalating for 2 years. We've had intelligence suggesting a major operation at the festival but nothing this specific." He looked at Blake with the same particular quality Izuku had noted in the first meeting, the gaze of a man who knew how to receive hard information without weaponizing it. "Thank you, Ms. Belladonna. I recognize what it cost you to say this." Blake said nothing, but something in her face acknowledged it. "We have 3 days, Ozpin said, looking at Izuku. "What do you need?" "Keep the second tap in place but have someone ready to shut it down on a signal," Izuku said. "Don't change the festival schedule, anything that suggests we know changes her timeline unpredictably, and unpredictable is worse than scheduled. Let her think the plan is intact. And then when she moves, we move faster," he said. Ozpin looked at him across the desk, and the gears turned in the walls, and outside the window the festival banners were snapping in the wind from the cliffs. "You're remarkably calm for someone describing an imminent attack on 40,000 civilians," Ozpin said. "I've been here before," Izuku said. "Not the specifics. But the shape of it." He looked at the headmaster evenly. "The people who built this plan think they've accounted for everything. They haven't accounted for the fact that I can hit things harder than their plan assumed was possible." Ozpin considered this. Then, with the quiet that made a thing true, "I believe you." That evening, Ruby found him back in the library, and this time he wasn't reading the Grimm taxonomy. He had a blank notebook open and he was writing, in the fast shorthand of someone externalizing a plan from working memory into structure. She sat down and didn't ask what it was. 3 days, she said. 3 days, he agreed. "Are you scared?" He considered the question seriously, the way he considered all her questions. "No," he said. "Then, I'm alert. There's a version of me that would have been scared of this." He was a different version. "What happened to him?" "He grew into this one," Izuku said. "Through a lot of things that were harder than this." Ruby looked at the notebook. At the notes written too small and fast for her to read at that angle, the shorthand of a mind that had been doing this for years. She thought about the crater in the clearing. About the Beowulf that stopped existing. About the assessment wall with the crack running to the corner. "Whatever happens," she said, "you're not in it alone." He looked at her, and the green eyes were direct and warm and carrying the specific quality she'd identified from the beginning, the quality of someone who saw you accurately, without addition or subtraction. "I know," he said. She reached into her pocket and slid something across the table to him. A photograph, printed from a scroll, small and slightly warm from being in her pocket. A picture of Team RWBY at some prior festival event, all 4 of them in the stands, mid-laugh, Ruby in the middle with her arms around Young and Weiss and Blake somewhere to the left in the process of trying to get out of the frame. "I want a new one," she said. "After this." All of us. Including you. He picked up the photograph. Looked at it for a moment. Okay, he said. She stood. Smiled at him, the full uncomplicated one, the one that meant she'd decided something and the deciding felt good. 3 days, she said again, and left him to his notes. He set the photograph on the table beside the notebook, where he could see it, and went back to writing. Outside, the festival banners snapped in the wind. Below in the city, 40,000 people were moving toward tomorrow. Somewhere in the structures Cinder had built, a clock was running. He wrote faster. Chapter 5, Empire of Scars. The festival opened on a Tuesday with fireworks over Vale Harbor and 43,000 people in the arena and the kind of collective excitement that generated its own atmospheric pressure. The broadcast banners were beacon crimson and gold. The commentators were already doing the thing they did where they talked about everything except the actual fighting, and the student competitors were assembled in the staging areas beneath the main floor with the particular mix of readiness and adrenaline that Izuku recognized from every significant fight he'd ever stood before. He stood in his staging corridor and listened to the crowd above him. The noise was different here than in his world. In his world, a crowd this size at a hero event carried a specific texture, part faith, part spectacle, the sound of people who needed the performance of safety as much as the safety itself. Here the crowd was louder in a rawer way, less choreographed, because the vital festival wasn't just entertainment. It was proof. Proof that the huntsman stood between these 43,000 people and the dark, and that the standing was worth celebrating. He understood that. He'd been that proof, once, for a city that needed it. Pyrrha appeared beside him without announcement, which was her way. Competition braid, Milo in spear form across her back, Akuo on her arm. She looked at the staging corridor ceiling like she could see through it to the crowd above. Nervous? He asked, because he'd learned to ask her things directly rather than waiting. No, she said. Then, a different kind of alert. He almost smiled. That's my line. You lent it to me, she said, and the real smile surfaced briefly. She looked at him properly. He was in the new uniform, Beacon standard with the modifications Glinda had approved, the dark bodysuit he'd arrived in having been officially retired in favor of something that didn't have scorch marks and grim damage built into the fabric. He'd kept the same color scheme without having asked for it, which was either coincidence or someone on the uniform team paying attention. Today is just the tournament, she said. It was a reminder aimed at herself as much as him. Today is the tournament, he agreed. Everything else starts when it starts. She held his gaze for a moment with that full presence quality, then nodded. Around them the staging area was filling with competitors from all 4 academies, the air carrying the particular charged energy of people at the edge of something. When we face each other in the bracket, she said. You already checked the seeding. We're on a collision course for the semi-finals, she said, without apology. If we both advance. When we both advance, he said. She looked at him and something moved through her expression that was complicated in a way he was getting better at reading, not just recognition or anticipation, but something more personal that she kept in careful management. The same something that had been building in the evenings in the training room, in the small exchanges of technical honesty that had become a language between them, in the moments where she said things and he understood them before she finished, and she found that remarkable rather than intrusive. When, she agreed. Then the first bracket call came over the staging intercom and she was moving, crisp and certain, and he watched her go and thought about the collision course, and felt something in his chest that was anticipation with a different frequency than combat anticipation. He filed it next to everything else he was learning to hold without flinching. His first match lasted 47 seconds. The Atlas student's name was Schultz, 3rd year, with a gravity manipulation semblance and a combat record that was genuinely impressive. He came out of his corner with the careful, measured aggression of someone who'd been briefed on the unknown variable and decided the answer was controlled pressure. Izuku let him set the pressure. Let him use the semblance, a field of increased gravity that pressed down on a 6-meter radius, the kind of thing that would have been debilitating against most opponents. Izuku felt it as a mild heaviness that made him recalibrate his output upward by about 8%. Schultz saw his opponent standing upright in the gravity field and took a half-second to process that. That half-second was the fight. Izuku crossed the 6 meters in a single step, not a sprint, one step, at the output level that the speed trials had blown the metric system for, and he was inside Schultz's guard before the Atlas student's body had finished transmitting the signal that the distance had closed. He used one hand, flat palm, 50% output, to the center of Schultz's chest. Not to hurt. To move. Schultz exited the arena ring at speed and landed on the safety cushion outside the boundary with his aura shattered and his expression carrying the look of a man who had just had his entire competitive framework revised in under a minute. The arena was quiet for roughly 2 seconds. Then it was very loud. The commentators were already talking, their voices carrying above the crowd noise in the way broadcast voices did, and Izuku walked back to the center of the ring and waited for the call and thought about nothing in particular, which was a thing he could do now that he couldn't do at 16. At 16 every fight had been a conversation with his own fear. Now it was just a problem with a solution. The call came. He stepped off the floor. Yang was waiting at the boundary with an expression of pure uncomplicated delight. 47 seconds, she said. The gravity field cost me a few, he said. 47 seconds, she said again, as if the number itself was the point. He drank some water. The next match in the bracket was already loading. Above them the crowd was doing the thing crowds did when they'd seen something they needed to talk about, the sustained buzz of 40,000 simultaneous conversations. He found Weiss in the spectator staging. The broadcast relay, he said, quietly. Still intact, she said. I had a beacon tech confirm at 7 this morning. Cinder hasn't moved yet. She was watching the arena floor, but her focus was elsewhere. She'll wait until the crowd is largest. Evening session, he said. Finals bracket. Largest attendance, most cameras, maximum broadcast reach. That's my read too. Weiss looked at him sideways. Winter confirmed through Atlas intelligence that there's white fang movement in the city. Multiple cells. They've been in place for 4 days. Armed? Heavily. He processed this. Where's Blake? She went to meet someone this morning, Weiss said, and the line carried a particular weight. In the city? She said she needed to try one more time, Weiss said quietly. To reach someone before, she stopped. Adam, he understood. He'd read it between Blake's lines often enough to have the shape of it. An attempt to reach someone who had gone far enough down a certain road that reaching back might be impossible, but Blake would try anyway because that was who she was. She'll be back, he said. You sound certain. I am, he said, and meant it, and moved on. Pira's semi-final bracket match was midday and the arena was full for it in the way it was full for known quantities, people who knew what they were going to see and wanted to see it with 43,000 witnesses. Her opponent was a Haven second year with a duplication semblance who created 3 copies of himself and fought through overwhelming volume. She eliminated all 4 of them in under 3 minutes. The real one and all 3 copies, each taken down through a different method because she was not a person who solved the same problem twice if she could solve 4 different problems instead. The crowd responded the way crowds responded to Pira, which was with a particular kind of reverence that she received without joy. He watched her bow to the arena from the boundary line and knew what was in her face without being able to see it at that distance, the composed public version, the champion, the one that had been required of her since she was 12. She came off the floor to where he was waiting and the composed version was already sliding back, something more real surfacing. Semi-finals, he said. Semi-finals, she confirmed. You were reading his copy distribution from the second exchange, he said. Third, she said. Second was still uncertain. She looked at him. You saw it. The way you adjusted your polarity field after the second. Narrowing it, you were testing whether all 4 had metallic elements identical to the original. She looked at him steadily. Nobody else caught that. I was watching differently than everyone else, he said. The look she gave him then was different from her assessment look, different from the technical exchange look. It was the one that had no analysis in it at all, the one that was just her seeing him, and it lasted long enough that the noise of the arena faded slightly in his awareness. "Tomorrow," she said. "Our bracket." "Tomorrow," he agreed. She held his gaze one more beat. "Then, I'm going to come at you like I've never come at anything." "Good," he said. "And you're going to show me every bit of it." "Yes," he said. The word landed between them with a weight that wasn't entirely about tomorrow's match, and they both knew it, and neither of them looked away. Blake came back at 4 in the afternoon. Izuku found her in the east wing corridor outside his room, sitting against the wall with her knees up, jacket gone, the bow still in place but the rest of her carrying the specific quiet of someone who had been through something and was on the other side of it. He sat down beside her on the floor without asking why she was there rather than inside her own room. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "He's too far gone," she said. He said nothing, waiting. "I told him what was coming. What the plan was. I told him 43,000 people." Her voice was even, which was its own kind of hard. "He said the revolution needed a spark." She paused. "He said I'd understand eventually, when I stopped." She stopped. "You don't have to finish that," he said. "He said I'd stopped caring about the cause when I started caring about people." She looked at the wall across from her. As if those were different things. Izuku thought about the people he'd grown up around who'd said versions of that sentence, who'd had a principle that had started as a shield and somewhere along the way become a weapon, and didn't notice the transformation because the grip was still in their hand. "He's wrong," Izuku said. "I know he's wrong," Blake said. "Knowing doesn't fix it." "No," he said. "It doesn't." They sat there together on the corridor floor, the late afternoon light moving across the stone, and he didn't tell her it was going to be okay because she didn't need that and it wasn't something he could guarantee. He sat with her in the truth of a thing that was what it was, and let that be enough. After a minute she said, "He'll be leading the cell that hits the northwest perimeter." "How many?" 20 to 30. "Armed?" "Yes. And he'll have activated his semblance. He can amplify aggression in the people around him. Makes a cell of 20 fight like 40. And he'll be aimed at you specifically," Izuku said. Blake was quiet. "Blake." "Probably," she said. He pulled out his scroll and sent a message to Yang. 3 sentences, northwest perimeter. Adam Taurus, aggression semblance. Not alone tonight. Yang's response came in under 10 seconds, on it. "She's not going anywhere without me." He showed Blake the exchange. She read it, and something in her face moved, not relief exactly, but the specific expression of someone who has never quite been able to believe they deserve backup, confronting the fact that they have it anyway. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Stop thanking me for this," he said. "We're just people who show up." She looked at him sideways and the ghost of something that was almost a smile touched her mouth. "Is that your philosophy?" "That's everyone's job," he said. "The rest is just technique." She nodded slowly. Then she stood, offered him a hand up, and when he took it and she pulled him to his feet the gesture had a matter-of-factness to it that meant something different from ceremony. "Tonight," she said. "Tonight," he agreed. It started at 7:42. Not with the broadcast relay, that was the pivot point, not the opening move. It started with the Grimm. The first wave hit the south wall of Vale 6 minutes before the evening session finals bracket was scheduled to begin, which was either perfect timing or they'd been held back and released on a signal. Izuku was in the staging area when his scroll lit up with Ojpin's direct channel, a contact option that had been established after the second tap meeting and hadn't been used until now. South wall. Larger than anticipated. Huntsman deploying. He was already moving. The arena above him hadn't been told yet, the festival infrastructure was designed to absorb information in stages to prevent crowd panic, and the management team was doing exactly that, buying time for an orderly response. He went up through the maintenance access rather than the competitor tunnels, coming out on the arena's upper exterior walkway, and from there he could see the south wall and the darkness beyond it that was moving in a way darkness didn't move unless it was full of Grimm. It was a lot of Grimm. Not a standard raid. A mobilization, the kind that happened when something had been generating a fear signal strong enough to pull creatures from 100 kilometers of Grimlands. The broadcast relay hadn't hijacked the screens yet, but something had already happened, some earlier stage of the plan he hadn't accounted for, and the crowd inside the arena was going to feel it when the walls lit up with impact reports and the night sky showed what was coming. He looked at the south wall. Huntsmen were engaging. He could see the semblance flares, the dust colors, the movement of trained people meeting trained opponents. But the volume was wrong. There were too many. He jumped off the exterior walkway. 60 meters. He hit the cobblestones outside the arena in a controlled crater, the impact absorbed through his legs and distributed up his spine in the way he'd spent years learning to manage, and he was running before the dust settled, one for all at full output, the city blurring around him at a speed that turned the streets into streaks of amber light. He hit the south wall engagement zone in 11 seconds. The huntsmen there, 6 of them, senior ranking, moving through a tide of Beowulfs and 2 Deathstalkers, didn't have time to register his arrival before he was already in it. He didn't call anything out, didn't announce himself, just started working because there was work to do. The first Deathstalker came around with its tail and he caught it, both hands on the stinger, one for all at 40%, and redirected it into the second Deathstalker with enough force that both creatures dissolved. The senior huntsman nearest him, a woman with a war axe and the expression of someone who had seen a lot of extraordinary things, looked at where the Deathstalkers had been and then at Izuku. More coming from the east, she shouted. I'll take east, he said. Hold the center line. He went east. The east approach was the larger wave, 50, 60 Grimm, the mix of Beowulfs and Ursa that constituted a standard massive assault, with 3 Nevermores circling overhead dropping attack runs on the wall infrastructure. He came at it from the Grimm's flank, not the walls, because fighting from the position the enemy expected was wasteful, and hit the outer edge of the wave with a series of strikes that operated on a simple principle: remove the largest threats first, fastest, loudest, so the rest of the response force had clear operational space. He took down the Nevermores first, 3 aerial targets that required him to cover 60 meters of vertical distance in 2 jumps, using the wall as the second launch point, and he hit each one with enough force to remove it from the equation before it had time to register the vector. They dissolved in quick sequence. He was back on the ground before the last one finished. Then he went through the Beowulf wave the way a current went through still water. He wasn't using weapons. He had 2 hands and one for all and a decade of muscle memory that had been built for exactly this, high-volume engagements where precision had to coexist with scale, where you had to be fast enough to be everywhere and controlled enough not to be everywhere wrong. He moved through the pack with targeted strikes, not fighting each Grimm so much as resolving them, and the wave that had been moving toward Vale's east perimeter was gone in under 4 minutes. He stopped in the sudden quiet outside the wall. His breathing was elevated. Nothing hurt. He was at about 55% output, which was where things started feeling genuinely effortful rather than just physically demanding. His scroll buzzed. RWBY, broadcast relay just activated. Screens in the arena are showing something. Crowds reacting. Then, a second later, Cinder. He ran back. The arena screens were showing a broadcast that wasn't the festival feed, a manipulated transmission that had cut through the relay tap with a level of technical sophistication that meant it had been prepared well in advance. It was showing Grimm footage, real footage, the south and east wall engagements, cut together with imagery of Vale infrastructure failing, buildings dark, the suggestion of a city being overrun. It was not accurate, the walls were holding, the huntsmen were engaged, the situation was serious but managed, but 43,000 people in a stadium at night seeing fire and Grimm on every screen experienced something much more primal than reason. The fear started generating before the first person screamed. Izuku felt it as he came back through the arena exterior, a change in the air quality, something below hearing, the atmospheric signature of a very large number of people producing the specific emotional output that attracted Grimm. He had maybe 3 minutes before whatever reserves were lurking in the Grimlands beyond the engaged perimeter started responding to it. He went up over the exterior wall and in through the commentary booth level, which put him above the arena floor with a sightline over the entire crowd. Cinder was on the arena floor. She had dropped all pretense. The elegant third-year student was gone, she was moving with a fluid intensity through the arena's lower security team, and she had her semblance out. He'd wondered what the classified semblance was. Now he knew, it was fire, but not ordinary fire, something darker and more precise, dust-grade heat that she directed with surgical control. She was cutting through the security team's aura shields with focused application, not attacking to injure, attacking to remove obstacles. She was heading for the relay control station at the arena's center post. If she reached it she could amplify the broadcast, push it to every scroll and veil, and the fear signal the arena crowd was generating would become city-wide. He stepped off the commentary level. The jump was 30 meters to the arena floor and he didn't land gently. He landed between Cinder and the control station with enough force to crack the reinforced floor in a ring and the shockwave sent 2 of her operatives stumbling backward. She stopped. They looked at each other across 6 meters of cracked arena floor, the crowd noise a wall of sound above them, the screen still running the manipulated broadcast overhead, fire and dark. "You're fast," she said. "You knew I would be," he said. "I planned for fast," she said, and there was something in her tone that was different from every prior exchange, stripped of the elegance, down to something more direct. She'd been building toward this, he realized. Not just the plan. This specifically. Him, here, in this moment. She wanted to know. After the sparring session on the terrace, after the months of circling, she'd engineered a situation where they'd face each other at real output and she'd get the answer she'd been after. "We can do this after you shut down the broadcast," he said. "The broadcast doesn't stop," she said. "It's the point." 43,000 people, he said. "The world changes because someone makes it," she said, and she believed it, completely and without performance, which was the most dangerous version of a wrong idea. The huntsman system is a cage. Every kingdom feeds people into the machine and the machine grinds them and calls it protection. Someone has to break the cage. By feeding 43,000 people to Grimm. By proving the cage is already broken, she said. By making it so obvious even the people inside it can't pretend otherwise. He looked at her for one more second. "Shut it down," he said, "and I'll give you the real fight you came here for. Right now, tonight. Full output. Your answer." She was very still. "After," he said. "Shut it down first." Something moved through her expression, the ambition and the damage underneath it and the part of her that was, at the core, a person who had been aimed like a weapon by someone whose name wasn't hers, and who had somewhere along the way stopped being able to tell the difference between their purpose and her own. Then the stillness resolved and the blades came up. "After," she agreed. She turned and put both blades through the relay control station in a precise cut that took the broadcast terminal offline. The screens above the arena went dark, then defaulted to the festival backup feed, which showed the south wall engagement being handled, the real footage, not the cut version, huntsmen advancing, the wave cresting and breaking. The crowd noise changed. Not immediately, fear didn't reverse on a dime, but the direction of it shifted, and 43,000 people who had been staring at the end of their world were now staring at people fighting to defend it, and that was a different frequency entirely. The grim response that had been building in the outer darkness lost its anchor and began to disperse. Cinder turned back to him. "Now," she said. She came at full output, and he finally understood what her semblance actually was, not just fire, but heat converted to pure kinetic energy at the point of impact, which meant every strike she landed carried a thermal component in addition to the physical force. It was extraordinary. In a match against anyone else at Beacon it would have been unmatched. She was the best opponent he'd faced on Remnant. He matched her. He took the first exchange at 60% and felt the thermal impact across his guard, a sharp, localized burn that his body processed and moved past, and by the second exchange he understood her combination sequences well enough to be inside them rather than reacting to them. She was brilliant and relentless and completely without fear, and he matched every bit of it. The third exchange, she caught him, really caught him, a strike to the jaw that carried both the physical force and the thermal component, and his head rocked back and he tasted copper and she was already moving for the follow. He let her complete it. He took the follow on his forearm, absorbed it, and when she was fully committed he used her momentum, redirected it, and for the second time they stood with her facing the wrong direction. He was behind her. His hand was at her shoulder, not gripping, just resting, the way you'd stop someone walking toward an edge. "Done," he said quietly. She was breathing hard. So was he. "You pulled it," she said. "No," he said. "I used what I needed to use." "You're very good." He stepped back and came around to face her. "This isn't what you actually want." "You don't know what I want." "You want to be measured," he said. "Accurately. You've been in rooms full of people who didn't have the capacity to see you clearly and you've been building and pushing and arranging just to find out if there's a ceiling. That's what this was." He watched her. "There isn't one that you've hit yet. But this isn't the way to find it." She stared at him, and her expression was complicated in a way he hadn't seen from her before, not the elegance or the precision, but something underneath, the raw thing. "You don't get to," she started. "Cinder." Her name, just her name, in a tone that wasn't authoritative or pitying or cautious, just direct, person to person, and she stopped. "It's over tonight," he said. "Whatever comes next, the festival plan is done. Your people are going to be engaged on the perimeter and in the city and they're going to lose because the huntsmen here are good and your operation has been compromised since we found the first tap." He held her gaze. "Walk away from this one and think about what you're actually after." She looked at him for a long time. Then she looked at the darkened relay station. At the arena above them, the crowd sound shifting into something that was closer to confused relief than panic. At the arena floor around them, her operatives down, the security team regrouping. "You're asking me to surrender," she said. "I'm asking you to choose," he said. "There's a difference." The blades folded back. Not dropped, folded, deliberately, with the control of someone making a decision rather than accepting one. She looked at him one more time, and whatever she was reading in his face didn't give her the clean resolution she'd wanted, but it gave her something else, something less certain and more true. She left through the south exit at a pace that was neither fleeing nor casual. He let her go. He'd think about whether that was right for a long time afterward, and arrive at the same answer. She was dangerous and smart and aimed at the wrong things, but she wasn't irredeemable, and irredeemable was the only category he didn't know how to work with. The northwest perimeter was Yang's. She and Blake went in together, and the report Izuku got from RWBY at 9:15 said it was the most efficient cell dismantlement the Veil perimeter team had ever observed, and also that Yang had told the responding huntsman officer that she could have done it faster if Blake hadn't insisted on trying to talk first. Blake's report was that she'd talked, Adam had refused, and then Yang had been very thorough. Adam was in custody. The aggression field semblance had worked on his cell. It hadn't worked on Yang, who ran on an internal aggression that didn't need amplification. The White Fang cells throughout the city were rolled up through the night as the coordinated huntsman response, informed by Ojpin's preparation, by Blake's intelligence, by Weiss's mapping of the communication network, moved through Veil with the efficiency of people who had been given the right information at the right time. By midnight the streets were quiet. Izuku found his team on the north observation deck at midnight. RWBY, then Yang with her arm around Blake, then Weiss standing slightly apart with her scroll tracking the cleanup reports, then Pyrrha, who had been in the field on the east side during the engagement and had apparently accounted for herself with a level of decisive violence that the senior huntsman on her side had described as significantly above expected. He climbed the last rung and stepped onto the platform, and RWBY turned around and her face did the thing it did when the full uncomplicated version of her was running. She walked across the platform and put her arms around him. It was a hug, genuine and uncomplicated, and he stood there for a moment with his arms at his sides before he understood it and put them around her in return, and she was small and warm and entirely certain about what she was doing, and he held on. Yang joined from the side, because Yang entered things with momentum. Group situation, she announced, and she was already there, and Blake came quietly after, and then Pyrrha, and then Weiss was there too, her composure doing the careful management thing that meant she was feeling more than she was showing, and for a moment they were all just a group of people who had been through something together and were on the other side of it. He let it be what it was. When it broke up, naturally, by degrees, Ruby pulled back and looked at him with her silver eyes, the ones that in certain lights and certain moments looked like something older than 16. "Photo," she said. "Now." "Now," she said firmly, and produced her scroll, and they rearranged themselves on the platform in the way people rearranged themselves for photographs, slightly awkward, slightly close, the city spread below, the harbor lights in the distance, the south wall still showing the huntsman finishing up on the perimeter. She held out the scroll and counted down from 3. He was in the middle, which he hadn't planned, and Ruby was on his left with her shoulder against his arm, and Yang was on his right doing the full grin, and Blake was between Yang and Pyrrha was on the far right with the real smile, and Weiss was between Ruby and Pyrrha with an expression that was trying to be composed and not quite succeeding in the best way. The shutter clicked. Ruby looked at the photo and showed it to him. The city behind them, all of them slightly windswept, the kind of photograph that would have been ordinary except that everyone in it was real, actually real, the composed version armor down, just people. "Good," Ruby said, satisfied. "Good," he agreed. Below them Vale was reassembling itself the way cities did after crises, not instantly, but steadily, the lights coming back on in districts that had gone dark, the sound of the response teams moving through the streets with the purposeful quality of a job mostly done. Pyrrha came to stand beside him at the railing while the others drifted into their own conversations, Yang and Blake, Ruby and Weiss. "You let her go," Pyrrha said. "Not an accusation. An observation." "Yes. Ashbin won't be pleased." "Probably not," he said. "But she made a choice tonight. She shut the relay down. She chose to stop the broadcast." He looked at the city. "That's worth something." "Or she's calculating the next move," Pyrrha said. "Maybe," he said. "Both can be true. People are complicated." She was quiet for a moment. "The semi-finals bracket is still scheduled for tomorrow," she said. "Despite everything. Ashbin will want to show stability," he said. "Completing the festival matters. So we're still, tomorrow," he said. "Yes." She looked at him and the wind came off the harbor and moved through her undone braid. He didn't look away and neither did she, and the thing that had been building in the evenings in the training room and in the corridor outside his room and in the way she said when, not if was in the air between them doing what it did. "I'm going to beat you," she said quietly. "You're going to try," he said. "And you're going to love it," she said, with the real smile, which was the most dangerous thing she had, more dangerous than Milo or Akuo or polarity or any combination of the above. "Yes," he said, and meant all of it. The city was quiet by 2 in the morning. The perimeter was secured. The white fang cells were processed. The festival arena was being assessed for tomorrow's continuation. In the communications tower, the relay tap was removed by Ashbin's team and traced to a source that would provide intelligence for weeks. Glinda found Izuku in the hallway outside the dormitory wing at 2:15, on her way back from her own debrief, still precise and composed even at this hour, which was something he'd stopped finding surprising. She stopped when she saw him. "Get some sleep," she said. "I will," he said. She looked at him for a moment with those sharp green eyes, the professional assessment that he knew now had a different quality than it had on the landing pad 6 weeks ago. The first time she'd looked at him it had been categorization. Now it was something that had more texture to it, the look of someone who had updated a model significantly and was still integrating the changes. "You did well tonight," she said. Clipped, precise, given without excess. From Glinda Goodwitch, it was the equivalent of a standing ovation. My team did well, he said. She considered this. Yes, she said. They did. A pause. Both things can be true, Mr. Midoriya. He held her gaze. Both things can be true, he agreed. She walked on down the hallway, heels precise on the stone. He went to his room and sat on the bed and looked at the photograph Ruby had sent to his scroll. All of them on the platform, windswept, real. He set the scroll on the table next to the desk where the photograph she'd given him in the library was still sitting, the earlier one, Team RWBY before he'd arrived, before any of this. The two photographs next to each other. He looked at them for a moment. Then he lay back on the bed and let the ceiling be the ceiling, and the city was doing its nighttime thing below the windows, and somewhere out there Cinder was making whatever decision she was making, and in the morning there was a match against Pyrrha that he was going to walk into at full capacity and so was she, and everything after that was the next thing. He closed his eyes. He was exactly where he was. Chapter 6, What We Build in the Ash. The match against Pyrrha lasted 11 minutes and 43 seconds. Afterward, neither of them could have told you the exact sequence with any reliability, not because they weren't paying attention but because 11 minutes and 43 seconds of two people operating at genuine maximum capacity didn't produce a clean narrative. It produced moments. Impressions. The way her spear came around low and inside when she wanted him to commit upward. The specific sound one for all made at 80% in an enclosed arena, a crack and hum that the crowd initially flinched from and then leaned toward. The moment in the 6th minute when she used polarity to pull every metal element in the arena's structural framework simultaneously and directed the resulting field at him, which was the most creative combat application he'd ever been on the receiving end of, and the fact that he broke through it and the look on her face when he did was not defeat but something closer to joy. He won. She was on one knee at the arena boundary, aura depleted, Milo and Akuo on the ground beside her, and she was breathing hard and looking at the floor for a moment before she looked up at him, and when she looked up the real smile was there, immediate, full, unguarded. "Show me what you did in the 7th exchange," she said, before he could say anything. He laughed. An actual laugh, complete, the kind he hadn't heard from himself in long enough that the sound was briefly unfamiliar. He reached down and she took his hand and he pulled her to her feet, and the crowd above them was extremely loud, and she was still smiling, and he held her hand a beat longer than the pull required. "Later," he said. "When we're not standing in front of 40,000 people." "They're not watching us," she said. "Everyone is watching us," he said. She glanced at the crowd and the cameras and back at him. "Fair," she said, and released his hand with a deliberateness that was its own kind of statement. He went on to win the finals bracket against a Haven third year whose semblance generated localized time dilation, which was genuinely interesting and also not sufficient. The match lasted 4 minutes. The crowd by this point had fully committed to the specific frequency of enthusiasm reserved for watching something historic, and the festival's broadcast commentators were doing what commentators did when they'd run out of prior references: they started making things up, which at least had the quality of being entertaining. When it was over he stood in the center of the arena with the festival director holding his wrist up, and the noise was enormous and immediate, and he felt something in his chest that was simple and unguarded and didn't require him to do anything with it except let it be there. He found Ruby's face in the front spectator row. She had both fists in the air and was saying something he couldn't hear over the crowd, and her eyes were bright, and beside her Yang was doing the same thing at twice the volume, and Weiss had the expression of someone whose model had been fully confirmed and was experiencing a satisfaction she was trying to keep proportionate. Blake was watching him with the quiet steadiness she'd arrived at somewhere between the northwest perimeter and the morning after, and she caught his eye and gave him the small nod that was hers specifically, the one that meant "I see you and also I know," and also several other things at once. He nodded back. Veil threw the festival closing ceremony 3 days later, because the city needed it. The attack had been contained, the response had been decisive, and the narrative the civic leadership wanted was the one where Beacon and the Huntsman had proven exactly what they were supposed to prove. There was truth in that narrative, so it wasn't dishonest, just selectively focused, which was how most public narratives operated. The ceremony was outdoors, in the plaza below Beacon's clifftop perimeter, with the city spread beyond and the harbor lit and the night carrying the warm end of festival energy that crowds generated when the tension had resolved and the relief was setting in. Izuku stood near the back of the Beacon contingent in a formal uniform that still felt slightly foreign, watching the crowd move. Glinda materialized beside him with a glass of something that looked ceremonial rather than enjoyable, which she held without drinking. The council has asked Ojpin several questions about the festival response, she said, without preamble. He's given them satisfactory answers. Your name appeared in 3 of his responses. How did that go? The council expressed interest in meeting you. She paused. I advised Ojpin to manage that process slowly. Thank you, he said. It wasn't for your benefit, she said, with the clipped honesty that was her constant register. Institutional interest in exceptional individuals tends to produce either constraints or exploitation. Both outcomes are unproductive. She looked at the crowd. You're more useful as what you are than as what they'd want to classify you as. He looked at her sidelong. That's a fairly independent view for a faculty member. I've been at Beacon long enough to have views about institutions, she said, and the line carried something that was both dry and real, a depth of experience worn smooth. She finally sipped whatever was in the glass. You changed something here, Midoriya. Not just the festival response. She was quiet for a moment, and he got the impression she was selecting words with her usual precision. The students. Team RWBY. Nikos, Valkyrie, Ren. Even the students who only observed the assessment and the tournament. Something shifted in what they understood was possible. She paused. That's a significant thing to do in 6 weeks. They changed things too, he said. She looked at him. I landed here with no reference points and a power that doesn't fit the system and a history that I couldn't explain to anyone, he said. They gave me a place to stand while I figured out everything else. That's not a small thing. Glinda was quiet for a moment. Then, no, she said. It isn't. She moved to leave, then stopped, which was a habit she had when the most important part of a conversation came last. Ojpin asked me to tell you the formal enrollment documentation is finalized. You're an official Beacon student. As of when? Retroactively to your arrival date, she said. Apparently the transfer paperwork from your home institution was successfully processed. He thought about Officer Hendricks and his report. Retroactively. The ranger office was very cooperative, Glinda said, with an expression that was almost certainly the suppressed version of something warmer. She walked away into the crowd, heels precise, glass still mostly full. He found Weiss near the harbor side railing at the edge of the plaza, alone, which was the rarest Weiss configuration. She was looking at the water with the composed face doing something more complicated underneath. He stood beside her. Winter's going back to Atlas tomorrow, she said. I know. We talked, she said. Properly. For about 3 hours after the festival cleanup. She was quiet. She told me things about the family that I knew the shape of but not the specific contents. A pause. It was, she stopped, and the pause this time was the kind that was choosing between saying the real thing and the managed version. It was good, she said. Painful, but good. Those are often the same conversation, he said. She glanced at him. You're very annoying to have around sometimes, she said, but the tone had no edge in it. I know. A moment of quiet. The harbor water caught the lights, moving. I've been revising my assessment of you continuously since the day you arrived, she said. I want you to know that. I'm aware, he said. You made notes. You saw those. Weiss, you left them on the dining table. She made a sound that was the Weiss version of embarrassed, which was very small and very quickly managed. The current iteration of my assessment, she said, with the deliberate composure of someone choosing to walk past the embarrassment, is that you are probably the most genuinely capable person I've met, and also the most straightforwardly honest, and also that you are going to be very significant to whatever comes next. She paused. For this school and for, another pause, smaller, other things. He looked at her. She was looking at the water. Other things, he said. Don't make it a thing, she said, and the line was the same one she'd used in the dorm weeks ago and they both registered that. Weiss, he said. She turned to look at him, and her expression was doing the thing where the Schnee air architecture came down one layer at a time, slowly, with the particular difficulty of someone who'd built it brick by brick over a lifetime. Yes, she said. Thank you, he said. For the 3-page analysis with the sticky note. Something moved through her face, and for a moment the last layer came down completely and there was just her, sharp and real and slightly vulnerable in the specific way of someone who had never been certain they were worth more than what they could produce. You're welcome, she said quietly. And then, because she was Weiss, it was 4 pages, actually. I edited it down. He laughed again, and this time it came easily, and she made a sound that was definitely a laugh even though it was very brief, and she looked back at the water immediately after. The after-ceremony dispersal moved in the way of large events unwinding, groups breaking into smaller ones, people finding the people they actually wanted to be with now that the formal part was over. Izuku moved through it easily, stopping where people pulled him into conversations, noting who wanted to talk about the tournament and who wanted to talk about the festival response, navigating both with the social ease he'd been building since arriving, which was genuinely new relative to the version of himself who had once found conversations exhausting. Nora found him first, which was always how it worked. Okay, she said, appearing from somewhere to his left with Ren in tow. The thing you did in the semi-finals. The 7th exchange. Pyrrha told me about it and I need you to tell me about it from your side. She told you about the 7th exchange. She told me about all 11 exchanges in detail while we were waiting for the ceremony to start, Nora said. She did a searching gesture, she was glowing, is what she was, and I need to understand why the 7th exchange specifically made her look like that. He thought about Pyrrha's face when the polarity field broke. She tried something I'd never seen before, he said. I broke through it. She looked happy, Nora said, pointing at him. She looked happy. Not winning happy. Different happy. Nora, Ren said. I'm just saying what it was, Nora said. I've known Pyrrha since we were 12. I know all her faces. That one is rare. She looked at Izuku with the direct attention of someone who could be dismissed as chaotic until you noticed how much she actually paid attention. She doesn't get that face from winning. She gets it from finding. Izuku was quiet. Just, Nora put a finger up, don't be slow about it. Life's short and Grimm are frequent and Pyrrha Nikos has been patient enough. She walked away. Ren stayed for a moment. She's right, he said simply, which was Ren's way of saying everything he needed to say, and followed Nora into the crowd. He found Blake on the perimeter of the plaza where the lights were softer, sitting on a low wall with her back to the crowd, facing the harbor. Her bow was still in place. He thought it might always be in place in public, and that was fine, because that was her decision and her timing, and he'd said what he had to say about it on the first day. Adam's in custody, she said, when he sat beside her. I know. He'll be processed. Probably imprisoned. She looked at the water. I keep trying to figure out how I feel about that and I keep arriving at, she paused, nothing clear. Just complicated. You're allowed complicated, he said. I know. You told me. A small pause. I believe you now, actually. It took a while. She turned her head slightly. In the White Fang, when something was complicated, the answer was always to simplify it into the ideology. This is right, this is wrong, this is the cause, this is the enemy. And it was easier. But it was wrong, he said. Not entirely, she said, which was the more honest answer. The cause was real. The injustice was real. The simplification was wrong. She looked at her hands. Complicated is harder than simple. Yes, he said. But it's more true. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I've been thinking about telling them, she said. Ruby and Yang and Weiss. Properly. All of it, not the operational summary. She paused. They already know most of it. But properly. They'll receive it, he said. I know, she said, and the steadiness in her voice was different from her controlled steadiness, the one she used to manage difficult things. This was more grounded. Yang especially. He looked at her. You and Yang. She looked at the water, and the edge of something that might have been a smile was there. We worked well at the northwest perimeter, she said. Blake. We work well together generally, she said, still not looking at him. She's, a pause, she doesn't stop. For anything. She commits entirely to everything she decides to care about. A beat. I find that, another pause, longer. I know, he said. She finally looked at him. You knew. I pay attention to people, he said. She shook her head, and the almost smile became actual for a moment. Annoying, she said, which was apparently the consensus. Tell them, he said. All of it. They'll receive it. She nodded slowly. Then, thank you, she said. For the corridor floor. The cold tea. All of it. Stop thanking me, he said. I'll keep thanking you, she said, calmly. It matters to say it. He looked at her for a moment. Okay, he said. He found Ruby and Yang together at the inner plaza fountain, sitting on its edge, Yang's feet in the water despite the fact that she was in formal wear, Ruby talking with her hands about something animated. They looked up when he approached and Ruby's face did the full version immediately. Come sit, Ruby said, and moved over. He sat on the fountain's edge between them. Yang put her arm across his shoulders in the unself-conscious way she did things that were physically warm without making anything of it. Yang, we're in public, Ruby said. And? Yang said. And nothing, Ruby said, and leaned against his other side, and they sat there at the fountain with the ceremony moving around them and the harbor beyond and the night being warm. So, Yang said. Permanent. He looked at her. You're staying, Yang said. It wasn't a question. He thought about the answer, which he'd been thinking about for a while. Not whether, that had been decided sometime in the past 6 weeks at a level below conscious deliberation, the way some decisions happened, quietly, by accumulation. He'd been thinking about how to say it. Yes, he said. Ruby made a small sound that was satisfied and said nothing, which was unusual for Ruby, which meant she was feeling something more than her usual forward momentum and had decided to let it just exist rather than talk it into shape. Good, Yang said. Just that. Then she was quiet too, which was even more unusual than Ruby being quiet, and the three of them sat at the fountain with the night around them and the city doing its city things, and it was entirely sufficient. After a while Yang said, Pira's been on the west side of the plaza for 40 minutes. He looked over. Pira was standing near the railing at the west end, in the formal mistral red she wore for official events, her hair down, talking to someone he didn't recognize from the Haven contingent. She was doing the composed public version, he could see it from here, the champion, the polished presence. She keeps looking over here, Yang said, conversationally. Yang, Ruby said. Just an observation, Yang said. Multiple observations, actually. Ongoing since about the 3rd week of school. I'm right here, he said. I know, Yang said. That's why I'm saying it. She pulled her feet out of the fountain and stood, pulling Ruby up with her. We're going to get food. The good stand, not the ceremony one. Come find us. She moved off with Ruby in tow, Ruby glancing back once with an expression that was trying to be neutral and not managing it, and he was alone at the fountain. He looked at the west railing. Pyrrha's conversation had ended. She was looking at the harbor. Then she wasn't, because she'd looked over, and they were looking at each other across the width of the plaza with the crowd moving between them and the night being warm and the city being what it was. He stood up and crossed the plaza. She didn't move as he approached, just watched him come, and by the time he reached the railing she'd let the composed version go completely. She was just herself, slightly windswept even indoors, the real smile already present, green eyes carrying that full presence quality that he'd been learning to hold without flinching. Yang sent you, she said. Yang made observations, he said. Were they accurate? Yes, he said. She looked at him steadily. I've been thinking about what Nora said. About not being slow. Nora's perceptive when she wants to be, he said. She's always perceptive, Pyrrha said. She just presents it differently. She paused. I want to say something and I want to say it properly, not in the middle of something else. Okay, he said. I've been the best at everything I've done since I was 12 years old, she said, with the directness she used for the important things. And it made me solitary in a specific way. Not lonely exactly. More like there was a space in the experience of all of it that didn't have anyone standing in it. She held his gaze. You stepped into that space 6 weeks ago in the assessment arena and you haven't left it. He was quiet, letting the words land fully. And I don't want you to, she said. Simply. Fully. The harbor moved behind her, and the lights were warm, and the crowd was doing what crowds did, and he was standing in front of a person who had said a true thing and was waiting for him to say one back. I've been figuring out what it means to want things again, he said. Since the war. Since coming here. I didn't know I'd stopped until I started again. He looked at her. You're part of what I started again with. She looked at him for a moment. Then she reached out and took his hand, not to shake it, not to pull him anywhere, just to hold it, and it was the same hand she'd extended in the assessment arena after their first sparring session, and this time he didn't let go after a single beat. She leaned against the railing beside him and they looked at the harbor together, and neither of them said anything for a while, and it was entirely sufficient. Ozpin called him to the office the next morning. The gears were turning and the coffee was on the desk and the morning light was doing the thing it did through those high windows, long and golden. Izuku sat across from the headmaster and waited. 6 weeks, Ozpin said. 6 weeks, Izuku agreed. You've done several remarkable things in that time, Ozpin said. Prevented a significant attack on this institution, won the Vital Festival individual bracket, and, he paused, and something in his expression was warmer than his baseline, built something here. Among the students. Among the faculty, if I'm honest about it. He looked at Izuku with those deep, careful eyes. I want to talk about what comes next. I'm listening, Izuku said. Cinder is still at large, Ozpin said. The operation she was running was part of something larger. The people she was connected to, he was choosing words carefully in the specific way of someone protecting information while still being honest, are not finished. The festival was a move, not an endgame. I know, Izuku said. This world has threats that go beyond Grimm and rogue organizations, Ozpin said. He was quiet for a moment in the way of someone deciding how much to say. I have been fighting a very long war, Midoriya. Longer than you've been alive. Longer than most people in this world would believe. The enemies in it are patient and structural and deeply embedded. Izuku looked at the gears in the walls. Turning. Always turning, at different rates, at different rhythms. You've been at it long enough to think in very long units of time, he said. Ozpin looked at him. Yes, he said. That's accurate. And you're asking me to be part of it. I'm asking you to be aware of it, Ozpin said. What you choose to do with that awareness is yours. He folded his hands. You're not an asset to be deployed, Mr. Midoriya. I've watched enough people try to treat exceptional individuals as tools to know what that produces. You're a person who has chosen to be here, and that distinction matters. Izuku thought about this. Tell me what I need to know, he said. Not everything at once. But what's relevant? Ajban nodded slowly. In time, he said. There's a story that underlies this world's conflict that you should understand before you walk any further into it. He paused. It's a story about power, and inheritance, and what happens when people decide that some lives matter more than others. Something in his expression shifted, and the depth of it was very old. I think you'll recognize parts of it. Probably, Izuku said. We'll talk more, Ajban said. Regularly. There will be things I ask of you, and there will be things I explain, and there will be things, another careful pause, that I am still working out how to carry myself. He looked at Izuku directly. I don't often have people around me who don't need me to be something specific. It's an unusual experience. I'm not here to need you to be anything, Izuku said. I know, Ajban said, and the warmth was fully present. That's why these conversations are useful. He stood, which was the signal. Enjoy the rest of the festival closing week, Midoriya. You've earned it. Izuku stood too. Then, the thing you're carrying, he said. The long war. The patience. He held the headmaster's gaze. You don't have to carry all of it alone either. Ajban looked at him for a long moment. No, he said finally, quietly. I suppose I don't. The week that followed was the particular kind of good that didn't announce itself. No events, no crises, no operational demands. Just beacon in its post-festival mode, slightly tired, processing, the kind of institutional exhale that followed sustained tension. Teams were released from formal training schedules for 3 days. The Atlas delegation departed. Haven's teams left. The campus contracted back to its normal population and its normal rhythms. Izuku ran every morning at 4:30. Yang met him at 5:30, without comment, without making it a thing, just showing up with her gym bag and her hair pulled back and the easy companionship of someone who decided to be present and didn't feel the need to announce it. They trained in parallel and occasionally in exchange and sometimes talked and sometimes didn't, and it was one of the consistent good things he kept returning to. He and Pyrrha trained every evening. The dynamic was the same as it had always been, technical, honest, building, and also different, because they were both operating with less management between their actual selves and the words they used, and less management meant more accuracy and more accuracy meant the evenings were both more useful and more personal simultaneously. She told him about Mistral, about growing up in the tournament circuit, about what it felt like to win every competition you entered and to have the winning mean something different to everyone around you than it meant to you. He told her about All Might. About what it was to be handed a legacy and understand only gradually what carrying it actually required. He gave you everything he had, she said. Yes, he said. And you spent years becoming worthy of it, she said. I spent years thinking about whether I could ever be worthy of it, he said. And then I stopped thinking about worthy and just tried to be what the moment needed. She looked at him across the training room floor, both of them sweaty and honest, and said, That's it exactly, and he knew she wasn't talking about him. She was talking about herself, about the Mistral championships and the reputation and the destiny that other people had been constructing around her since she was 12. You already are what the moment needs, he said. You've been demonstrating it for years. You just haven't had the moment confirm it back yet. She held his gaze for a long time. Then she crossed the training room floor and stood in front of him, close enough that the distance was deliberate rather than incidental, and looked at him with those green eyes that were fully present, fully herself. He closed what was left of the distance and kissed her. She kissed him back without hesitation, with the same completeness she brought to everything she decided to do, and her hands came up to his shoulders and his came to her waist and the training room was warm and quiet and entirely theirs. When they separated she was still looking at him with the full presence quality, and the real smile was there, and she said nothing, and he said nothing, and both of them understood that some things were more complete in the silence after than in any sentence. Blake told them on the fourth day. She called it in the dorm room on a Tuesday evening, all four of them, and she sat on her bed with her hands in her lap and told them everything. Not the operational summary she'd given Ajban, not the careful version she'd given Izuku. Everything, the white fang from the beginning, the cause and what she believed in and why, Adam and what he'd been before and what he'd become, what she'd done as part of his faction, what she'd run from and why. Ruby cried, which was Ruby, not sad crying, the other kind, the kind that came from receiving something. Weiss was quiet and still for a long time, and then said, "You stayed," which was the specific thing she needed to say, and Blake looked at her, and it was understood by both of them. Yang sat through it with the flat controlled stillness that meant she was managing something large, and when Blake finished Yang stood up and crossed the room and sat beside her and put an arm around her, and said nothing, and Blake leaned in, and that was that. Izuku was in the doorway. He'd been invited but had left space at the door rather than fully entering, because it was theirs to have, and he watched the four of them and thought about the photograph on his table. The one Ruby had taken on the platform after the festival. All of them windswept and real. He thought about what he'd built here in 6 weeks and what the foundation was. Not victory, though there had been that. Not the tournament bracket, not the festival response, not Ajban's trust or Glinda's approval or the respect of the senior huntsman on the south wall. Those were real and they mattered, but they weren't the foundation. The foundation was this. 4 people in a dorm room with the door open, and a team that had rebuilt itself around new weight without breaking. And outside that room, down the hall, Pyrrha in her own room with the competition braid out and the real smile available without management. And Nora, who would show up tomorrow with questions and fix everything by arriving. And Ren, who said what he needed to say in the fewest possible words and meant every one. And Glinda, who gave the important things without ceremony. And Ajban with his long war and his careful eyes and the gears turning at different rhythms. And a world full of grim and complicated people and fault lines running through every institution and 43,000 people who'd come to a festival and gone home to their lives and were alive because some people had shown up. He would build something here. Not an empire of conquest. Not dominance or domination or any of the things that word usually meant. Something else. The word for what you built when you gathered people who were exceptional and honest and difficult and entirely themselves and gave them something to stand toward together. He didn't have the exact word for it yet. But he knew the shape. Ruby appeared in the doorway beside him. "Come in," she said. It was not a question. He came in. He was on the north observation deck at 6:30 in the morning 3 days later, coffee from the cafeteria, the city golden below, the horizon doing what it always did. The door to the maintenance ladder opened and Ruby came up, and then Yang, and then Blake, and then Pyrrha, and then, which was new, Weiss, who climbed the last ladder rung with the particular dignity of someone who was going to pretend this hadn't required effort. They arranged themselves along the railing without discussion, the way people arranged themselves in spaces they'd made their own. Ruby leaned on the railing beside him. "I've been thinking about next semester," she said. "The new curriculum structure Glinda's proposing?" he asked. "The one where she basically reorganized half the combat training program," Ruby said, with a tone that was both impressed and slightly awed. "Around the things you showed her were possible." "She reorganized it around her own observations," he said. "Her observations of you," Ruby said. "Of what Beacon students are capable of," he said. "If the standard is set right." Weiss, on his other side, "The council is going to push back on the budget implications." "They usually do," Blake said from the far end, turning a page. "Then we'll deal with that when it happens," Yang said. Below them, Vale was waking up into its morning. The harbor caught the early light, the water doing its slow, unconcerned thing. The Grimm lands on the far horizon were exactly where they always were, exactly what they always were, patient and dark and requiring people who would stand between them and everything lit. Pyrrha was beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched, and she was looking at the horizon with the expression that was fully present, fully herself, the champion and the person and all the complicated things in between. He looked at the city. He thought about the crater in the clearing on the first night, and the assessment wall, and the photograph Ruby had slid across the library table, and Cinder across 6 meters of arena floor making a choice, and Blake with cold tea and photographs, and Nora's 7,000 questions, and Ren's economy of words that meant everything, and Glinda's heels on stone corridors at 2 in the morning and you did well delivered like something precious because she rationed it that way. And Ojban with his long war and his gears and the particular weight of someone who had been carrying something enormous for a very long time and had just, maybe, found someone willing to share the load. And all of them here. On this platform. In this morning. Okay, he said. Ruby looked at him. Okay what? Just okay, he said. Generally. She looked at him for a moment. Then she put her head on his shoulder, because Ruby did things like that without ceremony and it was one of her best qualities, and looked at the city. Yeah, she said. Generally. The sun came up fully over Vale and the shadows pulled back from the streets below and the harbor was gold and the day opened in front of them like something they had earned the right to walk into. He was exactly where he was. He was exactly where he was going to be. In the weeks that followed, Beacon changed in the ways that institutions changed when something genuinely new moved through them, slowly at first, and then all at once. The training standards shifted. The conversation about what was possible shifted. The students who had watched the assessment and the tournament and the festival response carried those observations into their own practice and something propagated outward from them, the way light propagated from a new source. Cinder was still out there. The long war Ojban had described was still running. The fault lines were still fault lines. But the foundation was sound. And the people standing on it were everything.